Councilmember Wright.
Here.
Councilmember Clay.
Here.
Councilmember Robinson.
Here.
Councilmember Stevens.
Present.
Councilmember Sniffer.
Here.
Councilmember Schultz.
Here.
Okay, the first thing I want to do is make sure that everybody knows that we have an additional agenda item tonight, and that's a first reading ordinance authorizing a stormwater budget amendment, and we will do that as our second special session item. So that's item 1A. And in terms of upcoming agendas, next Monday, May 9th, we have a public hearing on the Hilltop Road traffic calming and a second reading ordinance of the panhandling and aggressive panhandling that we tabled last week. Monday, May 16th is Ward 6 night and is the first reading of the ordinances dealing with the tax rate and budget. And the following Monday, the 23rd, is the second reading ordinances dealing with the tax rate and budget. The Tuesday, May 31st, that's Tuesday after Memorial Day, we have a presentation on the use of cable equipment funds and the Comcast franchise agreement, and we have a work session with the Emergency Preparedness Committee and their presentation and discussion with us, and that takes us to June. At this point, we will go to public comment. Anybody who'd like to make any comments on anything that is not a voting item tonight, so if you have a comment on either of the budget amendments, please hold your comments for that. Otherwise, if you're here to comment on anything else, please come to the podium and identify yourself and keep your comments to 3 minutes. And Mr. Lovelace goes first.
Yeah, my name's Pat Lovelace, 7620 Maple Avenue, Tacoma Park, Maryland. Your peace delegate. Now, there's something coming up on Mother's Day in front of the White House. I'd like to invite everybody to come down. We're having a Mother's Day peace rally down in the front of the White House. Usually it starts about 11 o'clock or so. And we do this every year and invite their mothers, their children, their brothers, their sisters, and anyone else. So I'd like to invite you people to come on down. And also, I'd like to ask the City Council, is it possible on the ward nights, like we're having Ward 6 night coming up, to put like a voter registration kits like on the table so that people who are not registered to vote can be, leave like a suggestion there to pick up a voter registration kit while they're here, and they can register to vote. That would be nice. And another thing, too, is, like I said, all the nurses are having their birthdays in April and May, and my night nurse, Caesar Rowland, is having his birthday on the 6th, on a Friday. So I just wanted to let everybody know and give him my appreciation, too, for what he's done for me. And also, it's a historic day in Tacoma Park. I think you people know. You know, if you don't, you know, I'm surprised. And Terry Siemens reminded me today, I almost completely forgot about the whole thing. Terry Siemens' birthday is today as we speak, May the 2nd. So be easy on him tonight.
How do you make it big? Happy
birthday. And for somebody who is just turning 65, he has shown a lot of energy and a lot of dedication to my city. You know, he came over there during the power blackout and helped hook up my other oxygen tanks, so I didn't have to go to the hospital or anything that night.
Pat, excuse me, but how are you getting home?
I think a guy named Terry Siemens is driving me home, as far as I know.
I think that changed.
Well, I guess I have to hitchhike some. I guess look at my thumbs, that they weren't amputated yet. Yep. So anyway, I just wanted to show my appreciation for him, for what he's done for me. Terry, you know, you come over here with the Manna food package and stuff, and you come over to help me out several times. And you always come over to bring me to meetings, and you've done more for me than my own family has. So I don't just consider you a councilman, I consider you a brother. And yes, I'd like to see what we can do on ward nights to get voter registration packets out on that table, and also to remind people. And also, I'd like to get more citizen participation in these meetings. More people need to come and speak up. You know, the microphone ain't going to bite them. There's no fangs on this, see? So if people who want to have a problem in our city or anything, they should come and speak out. Thank you for letting me share. And anyway, happy birthday, Terry Siemens. Everybody clap their hands, come on. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
Time's up.
Happy birthday, dear Terry. Happy birthday to you. Okay, my time's up. Peace.
And on Pat's behalf and on behalf of the residents of Ward 4, I'll give him a birthday apple.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Emily Townsend, and I'm on the Board of Representatives of the Tacoma Park Silver Spring Food Co-op, and I wanted to announce to the public and invite you all to come to our general membership meeting on Sunday, May 15th at 2 p.m., and somewhere around 3:30 or so we'll have some food and some live music from the Sligo Creek Stompers, a local band, and we're going to discuss the business of our cooperatively run grocery stores in Tacoma Park and Silver Spring. And these are cooperatively owned, which means that the people who are members of TPSS are the owners. And this is your business, and we would like you to participate in understanding what's happening and making decisions. And so as your elected representative, I've been trying to do my best for the co-op, and we could really use some participation from the larger public. And so I want to remind you all that at 2 p.m. on May 15th, Sunday, May 15th, at the Tacoma Park store here in Tacoma Junction, we're going to be having a fun time. We're going to have a speaker from Crossroads Farmers Market talking about local food. We're going to have live music, and we're going to hear about possibilities of expansion at the Tacoma Park store. We've got a lot of fun stuff on the agenda, so we would love to have folks come. And thanks for giving me the opportunity to let you all know.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Barry Howard, 7607 Wildwood Drive. Quick question before I begin, Mr. Mayor. You said comments that are not on agenda items, so will there be an opportunity for public comment on, I think you said amendments, but what about the reconciliation discussion in general? How does that
The reconciliation discussion, now is the time to comment.
Okay,
The budget amendments are for the current fiscal year.
right. Yeah, I'm concerned about 2012 with the speed
Now's the
camera
time.
fund. Okay, now I just wasted half an hour on that. All right. For the record, I'm Barry Howard, and I've been following the budget discussions, although I haven't been able to attend some of the meetings here. And I wanted to express my great concern, and I share this concern with a number of my neighbors who've been working with the city on design work for new sidewalks in Ward 6. And so as one exhibit I have, and you've all seen this probably, half a dozen times at least, so here's the Phase 1 sidewalk installation map. You'll notice that most of the red on the map, which is proposed sidewalks to be installed, are in Ward 2 and Ward 6, which are actually are in the budget and of my concern. But most of the green is where there are established sidewalks, and most of them are in Ward 4, 3, and 1. So I have heard much debate that, and I concur with Councilmember Clay's characterization that there's an inherent inequity here, and so I would urge the council not to pinch $100K or 150 or 185 from the speed camera fund, and take that opportunity for Ward 6 and Ward 2 to have a walkable community as the rest of Tacoma Park enjoys. I have a report here. It talks about complete streets, help keep kids safe. And it says right here, statistic, pedestrian injury is the leading cause of unintentional injury-related death among children aged 5 to 14. My children are 5 and 2, and I don't want them to succumb to this, and I do want them to have a sidewalk to ride their bike on and to play and to talk to my neighbors. And so this is of great concern. And this ties in with the sustainability coordinator issue, which is another thing that is of great concern for me. I think it's premature for the council to make a decision on this point right now. I actually support green measures. I support Councilmember Clay's 10 to a dozen points on the sustainability initiatives. I support the Green Deal that Councilmember Wright has discussed for Tacoma Park, but I think the discussion has to be larger than what we saw at Ward 3 night, which was a great show of people in support, but I understand that a number of those people were on the environmental task force, so they've already, it's preaching to the choir, so to speak, or they've already drank the Kool-Aid, or however you want to characterize that. But I think that I would like to make one recommendation, actually put it as a referendum vote in November, so that the entire city has a chance to weigh in on this. And I would actually suggest raising the taxes 1 penny. I mean, I would pay that 1 penny on my tax rate to support the green plan. And but I also want sidewalks. And one final point is actually a walkable community within Ward 6 plays in nicely, is nicely aligned with the sector plan that we've been talking about in the Tacoma-Langley Crossroads area. And so that connectivity, those pedestrian drivers, like the revitalized shopping centers and mixed-use housing and connectivity, that's a very important piece of that. And so if we don't fund this sidewalk, or we don't even have the option to fund it, then it becomes kind of a no child left behind kind of issue. And, and the politics they play downtown D.C. are not the kind of politics we play up here, I don't believe. And so, and in fact, one other example of D.C. politics is, they tried to push some legislative issues on the last budget for the federal government, and some people cried foul play. So I would not pass this, what I consider a policy issue on this, and I would take time to explore your options and make the best informed decision you can and not be in such a rush to push this forward as far as a sustainability coordinator. Thank you for listening to my comments.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Elizabeth Moses, and I live in Ward 6 on Merwood Drive, and I'm also here to voice my support for the sidewalk construction money to be put or maintained in the budget without any cuts. Sidewalks, especially the current plan on Wildwood Drive, are especially important for our neighborhood. It's a really huge safety issue right now because of the parking and the narrow of the street. People have to walk down the middle of the street many of times, including when the weather's bad or it's dark out, including a lot of the children, like my 9-year-old son, when he's coming home from the bus. So we also have hearing impaired and deaf people within our community. So it's not just a question of sort of generic. It really is very specific safety issues that we really have in our neighborhood. Wildwood, as well as Glenside, which we're not talking about, but is also a really serious cut-through street in our neighborhood. So you get a lot of cars, and even with the traffic mitigation or speed mitigation that have been put in, you still get those occasional reckless drivers. So I really urge you to think of this as a safety issue and make the priority of the people who live in our ward the most important thing to think about. The second thing I would just like to mention quickly is this is the second time I've come to voice my support for putting sidewalks in. I thought this had been resolved well over a year ago, and I was extremely upset to hear that in what seemed a fairly capricious, quick decision, the money was frozen, and we had to sort of go back and have this discussion again. I was happy to see that the planning money was quickly put back into place so we could move forward on planning for the sidewalk in Ward 6. But the fact that we're having to come back, the fact that people who don't live in our neighborhood were able to sort of hold the speed camera money hostage and stop a process that already had been resolved without really any process to sort of engage the people in Ward 6 and Ward 2 to really make sure that that was a fair decision, I don't think is a very good process, and I really don't think it does Tacoma Park justice. Anyway, we're a good public participation city, and I think you should continue to honor that and not make those kind of quick and poor decisions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Donna Victoria, 1104 Merwood Drive. It's good to see everyone that I didn't see at the 5K yesterday. Two things. I certainly second or third what Liz Moses and Barry Howard were saying about our sidewalk plan through the almost saint-like patience and leadership of Daryl Braithwaite. The meeting a week and a half ago got pretty much agreement from most of the neighborhood and most of the property owners affected on a 3/4 mile stretch of Wildwood to get our sidewalk done. So please keep the money for sidewalks this year. I also wanted to touch on ADA funding. I see that I believe there's $300,000 for ADA improvements. We all know that it's federal law and that we have to make a good faith effort if we are doing any sidewalks to do this. And I'm not accusing anyone here of necessarily saying anything callous, but when there was debate about whether we needed to continue ADA, there certainly were some comments in the community about, well, I don't have anyone in a wheelchair on my street, and so that doesn't affect me. Or it's not needed. And the whole point of ADA is to make sure that there is access for everyone. We're all going to get old. And some disabilities are not visible. My next door neighbor, for example, is a triathlete. She is a 40-ish woman who's way fitter than me. She's also completely deaf in one ear and partially deaf in the other. When we talk about the sidewalks, she walks, it's 5/8 of a mile from Carroll down Wildwood to our house. She stops halfway to pick up her kids at her daycare operator, and she can't hear cars coming from behind her at all because of her hearing disability. So she's got a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. Often after dark, she works long hours for USAID and has to walk home with them, struggling to negotiate cars, to negotiate the 2 small traffic circles on Wildwood, which were part of our calming, but have, as Barry's noted, made it difficult for people to negotiate without a sidewalk actually getting past them. Experiences like that, and I'd also just say, personally, my brother died at the age of 41. He spent the last 5 years of his life in a motorized wheelchair. And I don't wish on anybody the personal experience that it takes to understand what it is like to move somebody around like that. But, he was given massive steroids for his illness and ballooned to 300 pounds. And I'm not sure, unless you've had to watch somebody hit a curb that has too high an angle and flip that chair and be trapped and humiliated in the middle of a Manhattan intersection, and you've got to get him back up in his chair. People just shouldn't have to live through that. I mean, the ADA is a good law for everyone, and so I really think that in a generous sense we should continue to fund it, and happily fund it, really. It's necessary for all of us. And just one last thing. I was looking at the budget game and really worried about where we would end up, and from what I've seen of this budget, I think my first comment to my councilman is, where's the things I'm not supposed to like, because this looks terrific. And I really want to commend City Manager Barb Matthews, Assistant Manager Ludlow, and Ms. Brooks, the Finance Director, for making lemonade out of lemons. We know things are tough for municipal government right now, and I really admire what you've done, and in particularly the debt service, which is unsexy and nobody's going to compliment it. But I'm really happy that you've come up with a budget that takes care of some of that and hopefully gives the city money to do more enjoyable things in fiscal year 2012. So thanks very much for your time, everyone.
Thank you. Anybody else? Public comment? Okay, seeing none, we'll move along. City Manager, no, council comments. Councilmember Robinson.
Budget season is tough, and it's tough to balance all the different pieces and parts. I've been haranguing my colleagues the last few days about trying to get back to the constant yield tax rate, which is the rate where we pay the same amount of taxes this year as we did last year. And I think it's a valid goal to try to get to that point. We all have to live within our means, and that includes all the citizens in the city, all the taxpayers in the city. And I also commend City Manager Matthews and Ms. Brooks and everybody involved with creating this budget is a very tough thing, and we're a part-time group up here, and I find it difficult to grasp and grapple with all of the numbers in this budget. And yet, still, I want to see people who I know are in financial trouble have the ability to stay in town and not pay continuingly higher taxes. So that's one of the things that I've been really interested in and trying to get to. We don't, when Ms. Matthews presented this budget, it had a certain tax rate in it, 58 cents per $100 of assessed valuation. So that's where we've been going with this. I think that we had the conversation up front about that, and in some ways we did, and we had the cost and yield tax rate hearing last week, and that was really an opportunity to talk about what our overall goal was. But by that time, this budget has been pretty far along the tracks, pretty far down the tracks. So I'm frustrated in that regard. There are other items. There are things that happened this year as regards the budget compared to last year, which are interesting. We thought we were going to be in a complete train wreck situation, but instead, the county made a mistake, and we're going to get about $400,000 extra that we didn't think we would have. That's nice. Highway user revenues, well, they're going to go up $100,000, so now we're up $500,000. Other things have helped us create a budget where there's lots of good things for everybody, and that's all to the good. And I also commend City Manager Matthews and on trying to beef up replacement funds, both for buildings and for things, and the things, now I've forgotten the word, but cars and trucks is where it mostly comes down to, because we have to plan ahead for that. And yet, one of those cars and trucks things is the police cars, which, and we have, I don't know how many, but in the 40s somewhere, police cars, which are used by our police officers to get back and forth from home. So that's a benefit that we provide to them. We didn't have that discussion. I kind of wish we had that discussion as to whether we want to continue that. And one of the ramifications of having that policy is that in order to replace those in 10 years when they wear out, we need to put an extra couple $100,000 into the fund this year. So, and in subsequent years, if we want to get to that point. So all this balancing of, well, how are we going to bolster the amounts that we have in place? And as far as the sidewalks go, although I agree that ADA ramps are important, of course they're important, and sidewalks we should have sidewalks where it makes sense. This is my kind of position, where it makes sense to have them. We had a survey by the Tool Group which came back with a number of $40 million to get all our sidewalks in good shape. Well, that's an enormous amount of money. We can't do that. And this year, unless we do it very slowly, this year we're going to what's budgeted is $875,000 for sidewalks, both for new sidewalks and for ADA work. Well, we're only spending $500,000 on roads, so we're getting near twice as much for sidewalks. Is that a good idea? Can we put off some of those expenditures? This is worth a good conversation. I'm certainly not saying we shouldn't have sidewalks, and I agree that in some regards the wards 2 and 6 are behind. Those sidewalks near our downtown were the ones that were built first. I could make more comments. I'll try to cut it short myself. But I'm having a hard time with this budget, and it's difficult to give everyone everything they need and yet not allow people to live here if they have to pay more and more in taxes. And every little bit hurts or helps as regards taxes. And so I have those folks in mind. It's not that I want to defund sidewalks or defund police cars or defund this or that. It's that I think we need to be frugal, live within our means, maybe below our means, because times are going to get tough in the future, and I'm very concerned about that as well.
I'd like to remind my colleagues that we'll have our chance to talk about the budget with the reconciliation discussion. Councilmember Clay.
three items, I think just three. One is I talked to the Recreation Department, and they said they're going to work on hanging up the tiles that were done at the same time that the mural tile and the ESOL mural that is now hung over their library door were done. So I'd be looking for a spot for that in the community center or some other part of the city buildings. And I appreciate that, so thank you very much. The second item is I've been trying to scan the letter that we got from SHA so that I could share it with my constituents, but I can't get it quite clear enough. And so could the city post it on the city website so that I could I could post it and then direct people to the city website? And I don't know if there's other stuff already posted from it, like some of the original stuff that we got from State Highway, but if maybe we could group it together or something around the 410 stuff so we have a repository where people could go and look at the most recent information. That would be helpful. And the other thing that I wanted to share, actually maybe I have two more things. So the other thing that I want to share is that we had a screening of the movie Bagot this last week, and some of the council members came, which we really appreciate. And I've been hearing from people that they saw the movie and they have already started changing their behavior. So I was on the way in on the Metro train this morning with someone who had their cup with them because they had seen the movie and they've decided that they're just going to carry their cup with them everywhere that they go, and so they have a cup. And I am not always as great as remembering to put my bags back into the car so they have them ready to go grocery shopping with. So I bought some more of the little tiny ones, so I had some more bags to be helpful. And when I went out this weekend, I thought, well, I might pick something up. So those little bags that you get at the co-op have the little clips on them, so I just clipped one to my belt hoop on the way out the door and was able to use that this weekend. So I don't know if anyone else wanted to share anything about the Bagot movie, but I hope that we get to have more showings of it, and that it will help us spur more conversation in our community about things that we can do to make a change here to impact the global environment. And I want to say that one of the most striking things I found about the movie was the piece about the bags going to China, when all the plastic bags that go to China that aren't recyclable, and all of the people sort of traipsing through it was just in piles of waste. That was really impactful to me. So thank you all.
Councilmember Schultz.
Just to follow up on Councilmember Clay's.
Just call me Colleen.
Yeah, sorry. I just have trouble with cup and Colleen and Clay and all that.
It's a lot of C's, I know.
Yeah. I was they're here for the Bagot movie. And while I had already come to understand the risk of plastic to our environment, and to so many animals and species, and the scope and dimensions of it, it was a tremendously powerful movie that really hit home and made you again rethink everything you thought about plastic all over again. And just so I commend it to anybody who can get their opportunity to look at it. It will inspire. 3 things I wanted to talk about. Number 1 is to remind folks, May 16th here, 2 weeks from tonight, is Ward 6 night, and I naturally want to encourage our residents, not only those who are here tonight, but many, many others, to calm down. I'm hoping that maybe we can find a way to encourage people to come by letting them know that there's going to be goodies, maybe more than normal. I don't know. We'll see. But it's important, goodies or not, it's important that you come, that you talk about the things that are on your mind, because this is your opportunity to have a clean, free shot at the City Council. Second, next Monday night at this City Council meeting, the Tacoma Langley Sector Plan is on the agenda for the City Council to pass a resolution. Now, I have not seen a copy of that resolution. I'm not even sure if it, in fact, it has been actually drafted. I'd like to be able to see it. But I'm also, and I understand why this is being scheduled at this point in time, because it has to be in order for the proceedings of the city council to be able to proceed with regard to the upcoming public hearing on the sector plan later this month. But I think it's important that something be posted on the web, if it's at all possible, so that we understand exactly what the resolution is, if not word for word, but to kind of get the essence out as to what the city council is going to be trying to do, so that if anybody has any comments between now and then, people in Ward 6 will at least have an understanding that there won't be, or will minimize surprises on that. Because the sector plan is something that, as we all know, people have been working on for years. There's a lot at stake there. I'm sure we're going to end up supporting it, but I just don't want the city council to get too far ahead of Ward 6 residents on this.
If I can just provide a quick comment on that. The request was made a couple of weeks ago to put something on the agenda. I've had preliminary talks with staff about whether that will in fact be necessary. I'm going to continue those talks tomorrow, and it may be the case that we do not need to put anything on.
Okay, well, just keep me in the loop then, I guess.
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Thanks. Third and last, just on the subject of sidewalks, I appreciate the public comments that we heard tonight. I agree with them all. We completed, thanks to the good work of Darrell Braithwaite, the second round of 3 meetings with each of the sub-neighborhoods within Ward 6. And through all 3 of those meetings, there were at most minor adjustments proposed for the plans that had been engineered. And basically what we have come to is, probably with the exception of one more meeting for the New Hampshire Gardens Association to review some changes, completed the cycle of community meetings in Hillwood Manor and the New Hampshire Gardens. I'm pleased to be able to see that we've gotten this far in the process, and I think the community is genuinely excited about the prospect of getting new sidewalks, pretty much as was anticipated some long time ago when this whole planning process began. And I will do everything I can, of course, to support this inclusion for the entire construction of these sidewalks in Ward 6 in the FY12 budget. Thank you.
Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor Williams. Lead poisoning could be a very serious problem, especially in older housing stock, such as we have in Tacoma Park. State law requires landlords to take steps to minimize the chances of lead poisoning in rental housing. Tacoma Park licenses all rental housing as one step in ensuring that landlords know about housing laws and adhere to them. Those who ignore Maryland law are subject to legal liability. A Maryland court recently awarded over $20 million to a victim of lead poisoning. Lead poisoning has its greatest effect on pregnant women, babies, and young children. We must all be diligent in protecting our communities from lead poisoning. Thank you.
Councilmember Wright.
Thank you. First, I want to apologize for missing Bagot. I had registered and planned to come, but I had to go to Boston for a funeral. I did talk to Joe Edgell, and he is going to let me borrow the DVD, so I am excited to watch it. Then I also want to mention that something that's in the District of Columbia but does affect us because it's very close by, it's come to my attention, it appears the architect and developer who owns the rights to the Eco Park site has bought the PMI lot next to it, and now has a proposal, and I'm still trying to figure out exactly what this means, but has a proposal to build on that lot. It seems like a building that would actually be a parking lot that would be in a similar architectural vein to what was proposed for the Eco Park site. It's unclear to me if that means that's going to be a replacement for the underground parking that was proposed in the original Eco Park site, and I think has a lot of issues because there's the oil tanks there, or if it's in addition to that. I think they would still have to deal with the oil tanks because I can't imagine they can build a building on top of it without dealing with the remediation. But we're looking into this. My concern is that that developer and architect hasn't been able to move the process forward with Eco Park, and would just create another lot that would have an indefinite uncertainty about it. That we would actually benefit from a community to have it developed appropriately. So I'll keep people updated on that. It seems that this has come to the attention pretty late of the ANC members also, so they're asking for a delay in the review process for that proposed project. I do want to comment on the comments made in public comment regarding the sidewalks. And I just want to do two things. One, clarify my position on this, but I also want to, I think, set the record straight on what transpired related to why we delayed in expending the sidewalk money, because I think it's helpful to know that from my perspective. So first, my perspective on this is, I just want to reiterate that to me it's a matter of a degree, how much money we're going to spend on the sidewalks, not should we do it or not, or I think we should build additional sidewalks, or where the priority for those sidewalks should be. I've said again and again that I think we should build those sidewalks where they don't exist and parts of the city haven't had sidewalks, so that's Ward 6 and Ward 2. And to me, it's really, the question to me was, we were spending no money on sidewalks before we had speed camera money, and then we had this money, and we're spending a large percentage of it, somewhere between 3 to 5% of the entire city budget now on sidewalks. So it's just a question of, to the degree of what we're going to spend, that I was, and that degree is in the trade-offs to the other things we could spend the money on, and I think we should have the conversation about what that degree is, both for ADA compliance as well as for new sidewalks. And again, I'm not saying we shouldn't improve our ADA compliance. We should do that. But we went through a process in North Tacoma where there was a lot of question about the value of all those ADA improvements. And there is a slight arbitrariness to it. So it's not like we have a rule that says we have to do X, Y, and Z for ADA exactly. There is a set of rules and laws associated with that. And then we have we're allowed the ability to adjust that slightly based on what we think is reasonable within the context of what we're doing. And so what's reasonable, right? So there's a fair bit of arbitrariness there, and a lot of the sidewalk work, people had a fair bit of question about the value of that in actually improving ADA accessibility. Some of the stuff, no-brainer. Some of the stuff, questionable. So that was directly feedback I got from residents, and that's my concern about the prioritization of how much we're spending on ADA and what we're going to do. And my ward was the next, another part of my ward was the next in line to get that pretty significant work done. And then the second thing is around why we I wouldn't say stop, why we slowed down on sidewalks. I think all of the council members, maybe I was alone, but I think all of the council members, from what I heard, didn't fully understand or had a different understanding about what the state law said in terms of how we could spend the speed camera money. I think most of us are under the interpretation that the law said we could spend it very narrowly on a set of public safety concerns, including sidewalks. And the law had been amended. We weren't fully aware of that amendment. And we could actually spend it very broadly on public safety. And I think we wanted to get clarity on what we could spend the money on and understand what the trade-offs were related to that. And I don't in any way apologize for that. I think that that's a fiscally responsible thing to do, to consider what the options are and then say, okay, let's not charge off and do this. Let's understand what's going on here. What do we have the flexibility to do with this funding? And let's understand that and then make a decision going forward. So I think that's how it transpired. It wasn't in any way a sense of we want to block a particular ward or neighborhood or anything like that.
Hold on. Any other council comments? I have a few.
I'm also happy to talk to residents either tonight or on the telephone about that if they want to.
Yeah, because I don't want to get into a back and forth on that. I have a couple things I want to say. First, on the movie Bagot, I've really enjoyed seeing it. It dealt with a whole lot broader spectrum of issues concerning plastic than I had anticipated, and I was very happy to be part of the panel discussing it afterward, and I think it brought out a lot of really interesting points. One of the things that I did after seeing it was talked with Montgomery County Council member Roger Berliner on Saturday and was telling him about the movie, and he has been behind efforts to do the bag bill in Montgomery County. And he said, gee, I wonder if we can show it here before we have our vote on the bag bill. And, can we put it on our website, et cetera, et cetera. I said, I'm not sure about the website, but if the Montgomery County Council wants to see the movie Bagot, I'm sure that could be arranged. So maybe we can make that happen. I also wanted to say to Councilmember Clay, if you're looking for a way to remember to take the cloth bags back out to the car, we always hang them on the front doorknob, and when we go out, we take them to the car. I also wanted to let folks know that there was a new mosaic project that went up on the doors above the entrance to the school at Tacoma Park Elementary School this weekend. It's not quite completed because of the weather, but it should be finished this week. Also wanted to recognize the wonderful effort of a lot of volunteers who were organized by city staff, Lucy Nair, who did a great job on the Safe Routes to Schools third annual Tacoma Park 5K race on Sunday. I was happy to help a little bit with that and saw over 700 people participate in that, and that's a big step up from last year when I think there were 500 and change, and from the first year when there were a lot fewer than that. And they anticipate that next year it will not only be the 4 elementary schools that were involved, but Tacoma Park Middle School as well. And a lot more money was raised, and so a lot more money will be going to the schools. I don't know what the final figure is. Ms. Victoria, you're the treasurer of that. Do you have any sense of what the total amount raised was with the...
$100 all day today. We had 8,700. I'm sure Lucy Nair should make this announcement. We had $8,700. That was without the Whole Foods money.
And Whole Foods was like $500 or
$600. Thank you, Whole Foods. It will be over $15,000 raised for our elementary school.
Over $15,000 raised for those 4 schools. That was quite an effort, and people really enjoyed the race. The technology went a little bit more high-tech this year. Everybody wore tags, and when you ran over the start line and the finish line, it was all electronic in terms of the scoring, the times, all that stuff. So it's getting pretty high-tech. Also wanted to let folks know that I think there was a successful house and garden tour this weekend. That was in over near the Metro, and I'm sure that a lot of people who go on it every year look forward to the next one, and so I hope that will happen next year as well. There were I've got a note on one, and I can't even read my own. Oh, I know what it was. Last night, Azalea Records, which is the Tacoma Park record label, started by our own Charlie Pilzer, and representing a lot of Tacoma Park musical artists, had a concert here last night in the auditorium, and also released a CD, and that was celebrating the 15th anniversary of Azalea Records, and there was a good crowd and a great event, and it was just another one in the We Are Tacoma series that has been successfully put on by Sarah Danes, who has put a lot of effort into that, and really appreciate her efforts on that whole effort. I also had the chance this weekend, I had a busy weekend, I also had the chance to go to a Washington Nationals game and help honor the 1,000 people who were at the game who were there as part of a recognition of foster families. This was foster parents and foster children who had the opportunity to go to the game, and we all went out on the field beforehand and recognized the Foster Parents of the Year all over the Washington area. And it's an annual appreciation, and it's a really wonderful thing to see and to hear the stories of people who have done so much for so many kids in this region. And I encourage anybody who is thinking about being a foster parent to contact the city, contact the Council of Governments, contact the Montgomery County Department that deals with foster children, and just make that effort. It's very rewarding. And just finally, I'll note that I'll be attending a local government advisory committee on the Chesapeake Bay meeting, the quarterly meeting this week. I will be there Thursday and Friday. So I will not be in town on Thursday and Friday. City manager's comments.
Just a few quick items. When I was out of the office the latter part of last week, I did get a note from our construction consultant about a couple possible change orders on the Public Works project. Nothing very significant, but I just need to review those with her, and I'll get some information out to the council later this week. One thing I did want to just mention, somewhat related to the budget, but just a reminder to the council that the city for many years has provided a supplement to the state homeowners property tax credit. This is a program that is income-based. I got a note from the staff today, because I do, as part of our review the staff calculations and sign off on those for processing. Yolanda, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe there will be 158 property owners, I think that's the number, that will benefit from the city supplement in fiscal 11, and that we will be giving out about $163,000 to those 158 property owners. So those letters will most likely be going out either this week or next, and just wanted to share that with you. It is probably one of the things we do, that we get thank you letters every single year from some of the people who benefit from that program, so it is greatly appreciated.
And is it just income qualified, or is there an age component also?
I don't believe there's an age.
Not just for seniors, right?
No, it's not just for seniors. There is an income cap, and there's also an assessment cap. There's a number of qualifications, and there's been some changes to the program over the years, Councilmember Wright, but we've typically had about 160 or so households benefit every year. Also, the chief had asked for a few moments to make a few announcements. So,
Welcome, Chief.
Evening. To add to our successful weekend, I'd like to thank all the city residents that participated in our prescription turn-in program. We had over 69 pounds of prescription drugs that were turned in by over 50-plus residents, and which were transported to Baltimore today for destruction. Program. This is the second time the federal government ran it. It's the first time we participated, but very successful. I want to thank Councilman Snipper for his support Saturday. We had it really worked well. You turned in your drugs and went upstairs, you got your T-shirt, and you ran. So it was a real successful Saturday. Prescription drugs. One issue that the council and the city manager gave me when I came here was our cooperation with Metro Police. And we worked very hard at that for 4 years. Last week I attended a meeting with the chief of police for Metro, Michael Tabarn, and the new general manager for Metro, who met with the police chiefs. And we've met with him twice. The first time, I think he got to understand where we were in relation to our Metro station and the issues that we have leaving the station late at night. Some of the problems we've had with robberies, which I might add, are way down dramatically since when I arrived here 4 years ago. As a result of our continuing meetings and interaction with him, Metro Police has committed and has started already having an officers in the station and their patrol cars working the area when the kids get out, the high school kids get out in the afternoon, which has been a big problem for us with gang members coming into Tacoma Park and issues at the station. The second thing is they realize, as we have been telling people for many years here in Tacoma Park, that we have a problem late at night and during the dark parts of rush hour when people come off the trains at night. They will also they've increased their patrols and have officers now stationed in the parking lot and in the station at night and around midnight when the station closes. This is a big commitment from the Metro Police Chief and the General Manager of Metro, but they realize our problems and are aware of them and are working with us to solve them. And finally, I want to remind everyone that on May 12th in the Azalea Room, we'll be having a crime prevention seminar running from 7 to 9. Anyone in the community is welcome to come in. We'll be going over some of the things for summer prevention and to keep your cars safe, keep your houses safe, and we just want to welcome all the members of the community to attend. Thank you.
What was the date of that again?
It's May 12th from 7 to 9 in the Azalea Room.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Anything else from City Manager? I don't think we have any legislative updates, so we'll move to adoption of the minutes. We have two sets of minutes from January 30th and February 7th. Would somebody like to move adoption? Is there a second? Adoption of the minutes. Thank you. Moved by Councilmember Snipper, second by Councilmember Robinson. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Minutes carry unanimously. We will now go to our special session, and the first item is a first reading ordinance authorizing FY 2011 budget amendment number 3.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. City Manager wants to say anything about it?
Just wanted to call everyone's attention to the salmon sheet. My apologies, there was something that occurred to me over the weekend that I forgot to add into this budget amendment. Just very quickly, just kind of provide some highlights, and I'd certainly be happy to answer any questions. As we discussed earlier in this budget process, there's a couple revenue sources for FY11 where we will get more money than anticipated. We're certainly not trying to correct each and every account, but those that are more material. This budget amendment would address. Those would include forfeitures, as mentioned in the cover sheet. Late last fiscal year, the police department completed a review of over 100 cases of escrow funds, and the determination was made that those cases basically should be closed. The money's paid to the city as forfeitures. So the budget amendment that is before you this evening would basically account for that additional funding that's already been recognized, and it totals $61,960. As Councilmember Robinson alluded to earlier this evening, for the county police rebate, this is a kind of a portion of the payment we get for police that is based on property values. The county, when they were doing their budget last year, there are a number of different assessable bases that you can make calculations on. They just happened to pick the wrong one. And the figure they actually included in their own budget last year, which we mirrored, was actually low. So the budget amendment would basically correct for that error and recognize the additional revenue we will receive, which is $163,420. As we talked about during the budget discussion of the non-departmental budgetary unit, we have some closeout to do related to the city's past participation in the Montgomery County Self-Insurance Program for workers' compensation coverage. There is adequate funding in the budget. What the amendment would do is actually move monies between certain line items to get it in the right place. There's also a number of modifications to the special revenue fund component of the budget, basically dealing with grant funds. In most cases, it was community legacy funds that basically got expedited quicker than we had expected, and we had not accounted for the expenditure of those funds. During the current fiscal year, there was one community development block grant program where the council had agreed to allocate funding. This would be the Digital Bridge project. Unfortunately, they have some issues regarding their operation as a business in the state of Maryland, and so we will not be able to make that allocation to that organization. And then last, which is the actual addition from what went out originally in your packet, we've talked about this before, but with the sidewalk-related work that we did, we will be using fund balance in the speed camera fund, and the budget amendment that is before you this evening would simply formalize that and recognize that that fund balance is being withdrawn for capital projects.
Okay, and is it correct that all of these are acknowledgments of movements of funds that don't affect what you put into any fund balances for your proposed budget?
That is, well, Yes, on the ones that are before you right now, that is correct.
Okay, thank you. Council comments? Councilmember Wright?
So a quick question. Did the county discover the mistake they made where they shortchanged us on the money, or did we discover it?
They actually did. One of the things I do in putting together my budget is basically contact the county to the extent that we can, especially even before the county executive releases his budget, if at all possible, to give us some indication of what money we might get from them. In discussing that with them, they flagged that an error had occurred.
Is there any way in the future for us to check their math or make sure that they're using the right assessable base so that a mistake like that doesn't happen in the future?
We won't be doing that kind of transfer from the county anymore. It'll be like Prince George's County, right?
We hope.
Bruce is going to make that magic wand.
I think we could certainly ask for some of the documentation behind the computations going forward.
Okay. I think that same
Absolutely.
that idea is a long way off potentially, and there's still a lot of wrangling about what that rate would be.
That's correct.
Any other council comments? Any public comments on FY11 Budget Amendment Number 3? Okay, this is a first reading. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That carries unanimously. And then agenda item 1A, which first we have to vote to convene as the Stormwater Management Board. Would somebody like to move that?
Move.
Moved and seconded. Moved by Councilmember Wright, seconded by Councilmember Snipper. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. And any opposed? Okay, we're now sitting as the Stormwater Management Board in addition to sitting as the City Council. We have a first reading ordinance authorizing FY11 Stormwater Budget Amendment Number 2. Would somebody like to...
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Clay, seconded by Councilmember Snipper. The City Manager would like to explain this one. I think we have a...
Very quick. I believe it was
Sound
as
one
part
right
of
here.
last week's agenda packet. I had provided the council with a revised fund summary for the Stormwater Management Fund budget, and as I had noted at that time, we would be spending more in capital funds than we had anticipated. This budget amendment would just simply recognize that fact and increase the allocation for capital projects in the Stormwater Management Fund budget. The other consequence of that is we will be using more fund balance from the Stormwater Fund, as we discussed last week, and once again, this would just formalize that. So sort of a housekeeping matter before year end.
Any council questions? Councilmember Wright.
I just want to commend the city manager and the Public Works Department, because I think in here you see that there's a great example of a bioretention component that we've been integrating into many of our stormwater efforts, and I think it's another indication of our strong environmental efforts, and I appreciate that. That's something really that the staff has been pushing on, and something I don't think we get a lot of credit for as an environmentally leading city. So I'm definitely in favor of the amendment and continue to support the bioretention components.
Any other council comments? Any public comments? Again, this is a first reading ordinance. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. That concludes the special session. We will now move to our budget work session, budget reconciliation.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
One item back first.
Sure.
Does this mean we have $6,000 in CDBG money that isn't identified to go somewhere now? No?
I think I can answer that one.
What's the answer?
I don't believe it can be reallocated.
We can't reallocate. They won't allow us to. They take back the money. Is that correct? Yes.
How do the county?
The county.
The county, or it's the county that does that?
Yes, we submitted a request asking that the funds be reprogrammed, and the county denied our request, and the funds will be absorbed by the county through their Community Development Block Grant Fund.
Okay. Sometime let's revisit whether or not we can apply on our own and get our own money.
The city of Tacoma Park always has the option of electing to withdraw from Montgomery County and submit on a more competitive basis application for community development block grant funds, which could, in theory, exceed the amount that you get on an annual basis for a specific project.
Given the percentage of our income people that we have to the percentage that the county has, we got to do that.
Okay.
That's right.
We're going to now go to the reconciliation discussion. I proposed an order for going through this to my colleagues, and I didn't hear objections, so we're going to start going through this with what we said we would talk about first. Last time we talked about this was, which we were going to talk about the sidewalk funding from the speed camera fund. Would somebody like to start the discussion off on sidewalk funding? All right, I will. I propose that we fund sidewalk funding at the levels in the city manager's proposed budget. Discussion. Do we need to discuss this? Councilmember Schultz.
Yeah, I support the appropriation of $300,000 for the ADA. In discussions with staff, it's become apparent that, as Councilmember Wright pointed out, is that the exact amount that's there is no exact amount that's known. He used the word arbitrary. I might substitute the word, exercising judgment, as opposed to being able to follow a rule or a rule of thumb. And I sent an email around to my colleagues reporting on what I had learned from staff about it. The concern, of course, is the consequences of being identified by the Department of Justice as not following a plan could be pretty serious and heavy-handed. I won't go into all of that here. I don't have time, I don't think. And there's risk involved if we don't demonstrate a satisfactory level of funding. Of course, that begs the question, we don't know what satisfactory is. We think maybe $300,000 is, when you take into effect that we've already expended just under $1 million on ADA work already. But who's to say? I'm inclined to believe, as staff suggests, that we don't want to go less than that, less than $300,000 on an annualized basis for ADA work. But who's to say? With regard to the other 575, a piece of that is necessary to build the sidewalks in Ward 6, and I've already made my position clear on that, and I won't repeat it. And the balance of it is money that is needed by Ward 2 to initiate planning, and I'll let Councilmember Clay to just defend that aspect of things. So that's where I'm at.
Okay, Councilmember Wright.
I would again say I'm very supportive of building sidewalks and improving ADA. It's a little hard for me to say whether the 875 number is the right number for many of the reasons that Councilmember Schultz specified in each bucket. My concern is more, it's a little bit hard to have that number or that conversation in the context of what the trade-offs are. So I don't know if by saying yes to this, that means that there might be other things that we might not be able to fund, like police resources for gang issues, or the street sweeping schedule, or the Green Deal for Tacoma Park, or if you want to call it Councilmember Clay's proposal for Tacoma Park Environmental Action Plan for our sustainable future. So it's a little bit hard, not knowing exactly what the trade-offs are. I'm generally supportive of it, but if someone told me that we wouldn't have 1 cent on the tax rate for environmental efforts, and we couldn't find that money somewhere else, then I would not necessarily be supportive of the whole 875.
Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm kind of in the same boat as Councilmember Wright, but I think that Councilmember Robinson's earlier suggestion that we try to adhere to the constant yield tax rate is another big factor. If this council decides on that, then it changes the way we view such things as the sidewalk issue and kind of the funding level we look at for that. So I appreciate Mayor Williams' kind of format that he's laid out for the nice discussion. Maybe I had misunderstood Councilmember Robinson's suggestion, but I thought that that would be a good topic to put up early in the discussion so we could agree at kind of what kind of revenues we're going to be looking at for the coming year before we start trying to decide how we would divide it up on the expenditures.
I'm happy to insert that one as item 1A. That'll facilitate the discussion. Right now, we'll finish any further comments on the sidewalk funding. Councilmember Clay.
I think that it's important for us to use the speed camera money on public safety. I find it ironic that in my own ward, some of the same people who said that the council was putting in speed camera money so that we would use the speed camera money to fund our regular budget items and criticized us for that, are now asking us to divert the speed camera money to the regular budget items. But what I find most frequently is that the response is not to do that diversion so that we can have improved public safety. It's so we can do that diversion so that we can reduce the tax rate. One of the challenges, I think, being a council member, part of it is about budgeting, but part of it is also about providing some stability in the budget process. I like having the constant tax rate rather than having it kind of go up and down with the particular fortunes of a given year, because I think it's fair for people to know every year, kind of have a sense of what their tax rate is going to be. So if we got a boon of money one year, I wouldn't want to all of a sudden drop the tax rate by 5 cents, say, and then give new people who are buying into the community a sense that they can afford a particular house because, you know, this is the tax rate, and then the next year you turn around and you raise the tax rate by another 5 cents because your boon changed. And it's an exaggeration, but I think there's some value to having consistency. I also think there's probably some value to having some consistency and predictability in the available sidewalk dollars. And my concern is that, you know, we talked about possible other uses around other public safety issues like the gang deterrent activities. And what repeatedly came back is that, you know, there's not really a confidence in using those funds that way. And so then the suggestion has become instead that we use those funds to possibly fund police positions or other things that we might fund under the public safety dollars. And then with the monies that we had been spending there, we would take those monies and then spend them on the green initiatives or on some other kinds of activities. And I've become more uncomfortable with that because the shifting back and forth, I think, will create problems down the line if we lose the money from the speed camera. Speed camera monies are relatively new. Is this our second year that we've expended them, or our third? So we're in the middle of our third, so we've had 2 years of it. We had a year where we were a pilot as part of just Montgomery County, and now this last year we've had a change where they dropped the miles per hour from 13 to 12, or they increased it from 12 to 13, which changed the percentage of money that was coming into it. There's still, I think, some level of uncomfortableness, so I'm not, at this point, really excited about moving a lot of permanent positions onto it. I think that the city manager has developed a pretty wise plan that has incrementally increased the kinds of things that we're paying before with the speed camera money, and we have, we have, 3.75 police officers now on the speed camera fund. So we are moving more things onto the speed camera fund, and I'm comfortable with the rate at which we're doing that. And the other thing that I would say is that if ADA compliance is expensive, it's expensive. And so I think that we need to be able to fund that compliance. And sidewalks may be expensive, but I think offering the opportunity for accessibility to parts of this community that don't already have that level of accessibility is important. And I hope that it's something that people in Tacoma Park will get behind and value, even if they don't have personal experiences with somebody who has a disability in their community. Because I think that it is important, and I hear a lot from people about that. Again, riding to work on the Metro today, talk to somebody about how they already have a sidewalk in front of their house, and they're hopeful that the rest of the block could get connected because they have found the addition of the sidewalk in the 1000 block of Elm Avenue, which went in 3 years ago, to really help improve the sense of community in their house, because people are walking by and they're able to talk to them, and they're not, out in the street watching out for folks. One family just came back from another country where they were in an urban area, and they let their children walk to school all the time. And they have children younger than Piper, so I think Piper's 9, so maybe 7 or 8 year range. But they won't let that same child walk to school here in Tacoma Park because they don't feel that it is safe. And so we have a lot of parents tell me that. And I personally, I let my 13-year-old walk around after giving her instructions, but I don't let my 9-year-old walk around because I don't feel like that's really safe. And I hope that we're the kind of community that will provide all of the residents and all of the various sub-communities of Tacoma Park the opportunity to work on these issues. And I know that Ward 6 has been through the process and is, I think, ready to start doing the work, and Ward 2 is just beginning the process I think in one part of our community, in Long Branch, Sligo, we're talking about going to the 30% design phase, but in the Saska area, we're just talking about opening the conversation, and I want to make sure that that those funds are available for those communities.
Councilmember Robinson.
I'll just respond to a couple of the points you made, Colleen. I agree that stability is good in tax rates. I think if you look at the last few years where we lowered the tax rate, people's taxes continued to go up. And I don't think that people really care or know even care what the rate is. It's more what do they have to pay each year. And if their tax rate continues, or if their tax payment continues to go up, it's kind of immaterial what the rate is. So I think that's more what they focus on. And these are harder times, and people don't have as much money to pay, and so trying to get it so that their payment actually levels off, I believe would be a good thing. And as far as the sidewalk expenditures go, if we spend a little less, or put a little less in the budget, doesn't mean that we don't build those sidewalks. It just means that they don't get built maybe quite as quickly. So it's a little bit of it's a little delay. It's the old, you can't always get everything that you want is immediately right when you want it. And that's why I don't think it's disingenuous or to say that we can put off the sidewalks a little bit and we can reduce the tax rate a little bit. I think those are both worth. I think reducing the tax rate is a worthwhile goal, and it won't put people out of kilter, like, oh my God, the tax rate went down. They'll just say, oh gosh, my taxes didn't go up quite as fast. So.
Before I go to Councilmember Wright for some other comments, I'll just make one or two myself. I provided my colleagues with my analysis of what maintaining the level of funding in the city manager's proposed budget would do for us in the out years. And I made the assumption that if you just looked at the Tier 1 funding level, which is about $6.13 million out of the total of 40-some million that was in the design study, and acknowledging that that doesn't even include the state highway sidewalks, and we think that the State Highway Administration should pay to bring those up to compliance, and they may be some of the most important because they're on state highways. Still, just looking at that small Tier 1 piece, with the proposed level of funding, it would still take 16 years to get through Tier 1. And at the proposed $300,000 level for the ADA retrofits, it would still take 14 years to do the ADA compliance work. And so this is not kind of burning through money too fast. I think in many ways it's getting through this work fairly slowly, particularly with the ADA. If I had my druthers, I'd say we would spend more money on ADA. But I'm comfortable with the city manager's proposed budget and proposed levels at this point, and we know we're going to have some further information on the development of the plan for ADA compliance. And the one thing that we have out there as a possible way to kind of revisit this is as we start to get data from the new speed cameras, which have no revenue accounted for in this budget. We will probably have an opportunity at some point in the medium term. I don't know. I'll say 6 months. I don't know whether that's the right time frame. I think maybe the chief had indicated some point, or maybe the city manager did, that it might be a good time to revisit it. But we're going to have an opportunity to have a budget amendment to account for those funds as they start to come in. It may be an opportunity to look at how we want to use those funds, how we want to adjust things, but I think this is the right way to go forward. Councilmember Wright.
I just want to say that, I think if we're concerned about whether the tax issue is, if the big issue is that we're concerned about the tax issue making it so people can't afford to live here or moving out, then I think we need to relook at how we administer our subsidy program around home ownership tax rates. And I'd be open to having that conversation. I'm not sure we have time to do that in this budget cycle. But, generally, I think to have a good set of services, it costs something. And the actual amount that people are paying in taxes is going up a little bit, but a lot of the costs, the underlying costs, are going up significantly, and it's not like we're adding back in a bunch of staff. We did a significant reduction previously, so it costs something to have those services. I'm open to, if we can figure out a way to reduce that, I'm open to that, but I do think if we're really concerned about the issue being, can people afford to live here, are we forcing people to move out because they can't afford the tax rate anymore, then we should relook at the subsidy, because then it's need-based and not just arbitrary about who would receive that. Because we also have this funny situation with, you think the taxes are going to go up, the rate stays the same, the taxes are going to go up by about $350,000, that everyone's going to pay that equally. But in actuality, some people's is going to go down, and some people's is going to go up. And even if there was no increase in the total dollar value, if we reduce the tax rate to the point where the constant, I think it's called the constant yield, right? Mm-hmm. Some people's taxes would actually still go up because of it's really driven by the 10% cap on property value. So if what we're concerned about is people's ability to pay the rate and it causing people to be unaffordable for moderate income families, we should examine the subsidy and increase the subsidy amount.
If I can just add a quick comment, I may not be correct, but my recollection is we are at the maximum of what we can do on the subsidy.
I would need to go back and review this. I had had a conversation with Assistant City Attorney Linda Perlman a few years ago. I believe the state law, Mayor, has changed, and it's
Okay.
no longer capped at 50%.
Okay.
That's my recollection.
Because I'll claim credit for driving us to the max when we went there. We used to be at 10 or 15%, then we went to 25 or 35, and then we went to the max. Councilmember Snipper, and then Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. I know I've said this before. I thoroughly support spending at least $300,000 on the ADA sidewalk improvements and $575 on the other improvements. The ADA, I just want to remind my council members, if you haven't seen the court cases, go read them. They will divide $300K by the entire city budget, and that will be a very tiny fraction of the city budget. And they will say, you can do lots more. That's what the courts rule. So, the Department of Justice has seen those court cases just as well as anybody else. And so I really do think we put ourselves in jeopardy if we don't spend something along the lines of at least $300K on the ADA improvements. And sidewalks are very important for everyone, kids all the way to adults, not just people who have difficulty walking on the sidewalks or who are in wheelchairs. I think everyone benefits when there are nice sidewalks. It gets people out walking around, makes the neighborhood safer. So I'm thoroughly supportive of spending that money. I'm not particularly interested in reducing the tax rate. Councilmember Clay gave a really cogent argument about why yo-yo tax rates are not a good idea, and it's easy to see how that would easily happen in this circumstance. Thank you.
Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. I, too, support the, funding of ADA sidewalk improvements. I think the issue that I think is important, though, is the taxes, and I think it goes beyond just protecting those people who are at the most challenged end of the income level. I think it's about being responsible for managing the funds of our city residents. And I guess what has kind of driven my thoughts on this year is that not so long ago we were talking about, what were we going to do and where could we really save money in the budget if, in fact, our revenues were as low as we anticipated they were going to be. And now that it's turned out that the revenues are projected to be higher than we had feared, all those ideas about where we could save money have kind of gone away into vapor. It seems to me that things that were prudent to do in a situation where we have less income are still prudent to be considered now that we know their revenues are going to be higher. I think there are debts that we have that we could be paying. There are other uses of the money that make sense, and one of those is not to be collecting additional money from the city residents if in fact we don't really need to. So that's kind of where I'm coming from on this. I think it's not to create a yo-yo tax rate. It is to each year look at what money we really need to spend and limit our spending to that money. And I remind you that we're talking about taking money from reserves to balance our budget this year. Seems to me that we should be, again, keeping our tax rate to the minimum that we can. Thank you.
Councilmember Schultz, and I want to wrap this section up.
Well, since I spoke, the issue of the tax rate has arisen, which is a little different than the sidewalk topic. I support the current tax rate at 58 cents. I think we have to deal with the realization of inflation, which affects everything the city spends money on. I think we have to recognize the fact that the federal government has cut deeply into community development block grants, and we can probably expect, wouldn't be unreasonable to expect that we'll be seeing less money coming to the city for that. I think we need to take into account the fact that city staff, department heads, and others have indicated on various occasions that with the reduction and loss of employees, not just positions, but actual people last year, that everybody's work burden, not surprisingly, has increased, because obviously residents' expectations of what the city needs to be doing don't diminish. Council members' expectations of what the city should be doing in terms of services, and of course new ideas of things we could be doing, they don't diminish. There's only so many hours in a work week, and we have I think, a very professional and committed workforce, and but I am genuinely concerned that you can you run the risk of burnout and exhaustion if it's always a feeling like we're sort of asking staff to put in just that little extra. Certainly we do that when we have to, but I don't think it should become a 365-day policy. And I'm also finally concerned about quality of services. One of the things that the people move here for, I don't know, no one in all the years I've lived in this city have ever told me that I moved here because of the Tacoma Park tax rate. If anything, it's people move here in full knowledge that they're going to be paying more taxes than if they live on the other side of Carroll Avenue. Okay? In fact, what they move here for is the availability of quality services, ranging from the library to the police department and all kinds of other things that we wouldn't have if we were not a separate jurisdiction able to assess property taxes at a rate that allows us to do so many things that otherwise wouldn't get done under the auspices of Montgomery County. And so to be, it's important to be very mindful of waste and of trying to keep our tax rate as low as possible. But the question is what is, quote, as low as possible? Because at a certain point, you start, as I've said before, with revenues. If we decide to reduce revenues, you're no longer trying to accomplish more with less. What you're accomplishing is that you're actually doing less with less. And I'd also note that in the entire public hearing process, we've had 2 public hearings on this budget. We've had other people speak during the public comment period, and of course, we've each had our individual conversations with our constituents. But during this time, I have not heard a single person, either in this public forum or in one-on-one conversations, suggest that the tax rate needs to be lowered or that this was creating a problem. Last year, a year ago this time, we were hearing that, and for obvious reasons. And we've made the cuts that we really had to do to respect the tax rate and not raise it even so much as a quarter of a cent. And I'm not even proposing that we raise it this year. I'm happy with where it is at 58 cents, but I just don't think it makes any sense at all to be cutting it when there's so much that needs to be done in Tacoma Park. And a limited number of professional people on our staff who are able to carry it out. Thanks.
I just want to make a comment or two, and then I think we can wrap this section up. We had a really tough budget year last year. People lost their jobs. We toughed it out. I was afraid we were going to have more of the same this year. Things could have gone that way. I'm thankful that we're in as good a position as we are. I, like a previous speaker, public comment, appreciate the efforts that the city manager and staff have gone through to propose the budget that they did. We had increased costs that are beyond our control, like workers' comp, health insurance, those types of things go up every year. I think unless you have ways to alleviate those increased costs, managing to keep the tax rate at the same level is a prudent way to go. I think the sidewalk funding level in there, as I said before, is acceptable. If we had extra money, I'd like to see increasing the ADA funding. I think we've all made our positions clear. I do want to say, in response to, I think it was Councilmember Siemens saying that we're going to use, how we're going to use our reserve funds, and I would say we're going to use it to choose to pay off a debt early in order to save money going forward. I think at this point, we've all stated where we're going to be, and I think we can just say how we want to approach the sidewalk funds, and I think we've had a lot of comments about the tax rate and thinking about the constant yield tax rate, so I think we can kind of deal with that one too, and then I'd like to take a break and then come back to the rest of the items that we need to discuss. So I think at this point we can have a show of hands for who wants to keep the sidewalk funding at the proposed budget levels of $575 for sidewalks and $300 for ADA compliance. And who doesn't?
What was the question? Who wants to keep it?
Who wants to keep it at $875, basically, the $575 and the $300, as in the proposed budget? And there were 4 in favor of that. And then who doesn't?
I abstain.
Okay, so 2. So
No, it's too early to make the decision.
the level at this point is to keep that at that proposed level. Do we want to have any further discussion of constant yield tax rate? Councilmember Robinson.
Well, we've talked about it. Let's have a vote on that.
Okay. Who wants to, how would you like the question?
Can I ask a question
Sure.
about that? It's a little hard for me to, are you just saying like, get to the constant yield tax rate and we'll just figure out the numbers later, or are there specific things you propose you cut associated with that? It's a little bit hard to...
Well, I think it's good to have, as I said before, I think it's good to have a goal. We started this budget process with a goal of 58, or our city manager started the process with a goal of 58 cents. We had a public hearing last week, but we never said what we thought about the results of that as a follow-up on that public hearing. So this is, in my mind, it's a follow-up on that public hearing. Do we want to adhere to the constant yield tax rate, or do we want to go with the 58 cents? And our mayor is putting it up, basically saying, well, let's vote on it. And I'm, okay.
And my sense is we can vote on whether we want to get to the constant yield, and if there's a majority who wants to try and do that, then we'll have to figure out the details, and if we don't, then we can say, okay, do you want to keep it at 58 at this point and go on discussing the rest of the items, and when we get to the end, we've got a body of work that we've come up with, and then we know where we are.
So we're just voting on whether to set that as a target?
Yes. So who would like to have a target of going to the constant yield tax rate? I see 2 in favor. Who would not like to do that? I see 5. So we're not heading for a constant yield target?
Apparently not.
Okay. It's 9:08. Let's come back at 9:15 and continue the discussion with Sustainability Coordinator and associated environmental initiatives. We'll follow that with a couple other proposals that came up, and then we'll get to anything that we have either, and it's basically the proposals that we haven't discussed and then proposals that we have, just to make sure that we get to an end point where we've kind of revisited those things. So we'll come back in 6 minutes. back any of the proposals by Councilmembers Clay, Schultz, Wright, whoever, and what I'd like to do at the end of this section is come up with an amount of money, details to be worked out, not tonight. My sense is that we have all said, yes, we want to do an environmental coordinator. There are pieces that go with that. It's an opportunity to make a pitch for if there are particular things that affect the budget, to say what's in it. And then, we can come up with a dollar amount. We had the kind of the broad level of whatever that was last week of agreeing that some funding level between 100 and 185,000. It's 9:20. We've got additional stuff to do after that. I want to give folks a chance to talk about it in the way that you would like to talk about it, but don't talk too long.
Good luck.
We want to get home before midnight. The city manager wants to get on the road before midnight. We have a fair number of staff here who want to go home.
I don't think I'll be too long.
Okay. So, I don't know who hit the light first. Councilmember Wright or Councilmember Clay, you all fight it out.
I defer to Clay, Councilmember Clay.
All right, I'll try to be fast. I support something in the $50,000 to $100,000 range for green initiatives that would include contractor to initiate the sustainability coordinator activities for, I think, reasons that have been fairly well outlined previously. Do you feel comfortable with contractor versus staff member?
My sense was that people were comfortable with that. For the people who want to go, no, I got to talk about that. I think that's entirely the wrong way, or is that okay for now because we're putting money in the budget. We're not making final decisions on,
I just want to say,
good direction.
Right. I think the contractor idea is a good idea, especially after conversation we had with the Public Works Director on Friday that I found extraordinarily useful.
And you said 50 to
100,000. The things that I put into the plan that I published, several of them were policy things. Only a couple of them really required an expenditure of money, of specific operational money at that time. So what I found very useful about the conversation with the Public Works Director, talking about what are the kinds of things that we might use the green money for in Public Works and around additional tree planting money and other things like that, was the conversation about the rewards for recycling program. And so I was listening to what she had to say about what the ultimate end goal was, and is the end goal to reduce the amount of trash that we put out? Is it to increase recycling? Because the Public Works people anecdotally don't find that they don't see a lot of recycling going into our regular trash. And so there's a question about, how much then would the impact be to just reduce people's trash overall if we weren't really reducing the recycling? And one of the comments that I made is that a lot of people tell me that they'd like to have one of the blue bins, one of the closed bins available, and are interested in more of the composting. And so, to make a long story short, it seemed to me like it might behoove us to use this year testing out some of the different things, maybe with different blocks in the community or a larger section in the community, depending on what it is we were testing. So, it was interesting to find out that we're replacing trash trucks, but we're going to keep one for a spare. And the old trash trucks have the lifters on them, so it's conceivable that we could try a pilot giving people the blue bins and see if that actually does it increase the amount of recycling that we're getting or not. But things like that. See, will this make a difference to pilot out some of the composting collection activities versus having people do on-site composting? And I think that's a good idea. We should look at that more and get more prepared for that activity, and really be sure if we're going to make a shift and make the investment that we're not going to get an incremental change that might not be as big as one of the other changes that we might make relative to our carbon footprint or other things that we wanted to do. So I'm comfortable in the $50,000 to $100,000 range. I'm comfortable with hiring a contractor to do that kind of work. And then there's a whole list of other kinds of policy things that we would be looking at that I think we could move forward with this year, and I'd like to see us move forward with those policy pieces that I put onto the green list.
Councilmember Wright.
I'm supportive of a higher number. Not that I wouldn't vote for that, but I'm supportive of a number where we commit 1 cent on the tax rate, which is about $185,000. Part of that, I think, can be met by committing $5,000 of stormwater management expenditures to tree purchases through the bulk tree program, which I've said. So really, I think we need to come up with $180,000. And the reason I think it needs to be that amount is there were many very valuable ideas in the TFEA report, and I think that the $185,000 is just a dent in that to pushing us forward in being a green community. And I agree that many of the ideas are policy ideas, but some of them will take some staff time to generate and work on and get us to the right place. And I would like to be able to have the resources to properly investigate those and move them forward. So that's one thing where I think why we might want to spend a little more money than the 50 to 100. And I'm totally in support of the idea, particularly as we begin this, and using contractors for the sustainability role. And one of the things that becomes clear is that there's a lot of items that are on our both of our lists, right? And we're not going to find one person who's expert in all of those things. So we might want to hire a consultant or a firm around the street lights that might be different than the recycling program if we were to analyze or look at it. So I think that would give us the flexibility, and the funding of 185 would allow us to do a lot of substantive things. And I think that I'm definitely in favor of piloting both the pickup of organic material or figuring out a way to do more composting, as well as the trash bin model. And it probably makes sense to do it even on like a route, right? So you choose a route to do it on, and everyone in that route has the same setup. And I think there's so many items on the list that will have significant impact, including items around how we get the city residents to be more green in their energy consumption and choices around their homes. Because I think the estimate's been it's only 4% of the entire energy in the city is actually used by the city government. And so there's that other 96%, and we're doing a great job as the city government. We can probably improve that, but there's also a huge opportunity in energy expenditures related to homes, many of which those improvements pay for themselves, but there can be a need around someone like a sustainability coordinator. Maybe it's, though again, that expertise might be more hireable in a contract fashion, particularly as we start this out. So I would strongly encourage my council colleagues to try and help me and also make suggestions to the city manager to try and find the funding to get to $185,000.
Councilmember Snipper.
Thank you, Mayor. I too support the use of a contractor. I like the idea of starting fairly soon to do it. I also support some number up to in the neighborhood of $185,000 for all the reasons that my fellow council members have listed. And the only thing I would add, I'll have two things to add. One is not especially after reading the material from the Public Works Director, I'm even less interested in doing the rewards for recycling. I just think there are other ways to spend our money that will have a bigger bang. And I'm also supportive of efforts to help, inform, and support our residents in doing green things. So I think efforts on the part of this contractor to get, as Councilmember Wright suggested, get the majority of the where the impact will be the majority, not just the city government. If we focus just on the city government, we're not going to have as big an impact as if we can get the rest of the city to do it. And I'll stop there.
Councilmember Robinson.
I think 150,000 is a good number, and I think I'm on a roll tonight. I'm at odds with most of my colleagues on my approach. I think hiring a sustainability coordinator is a good idea because I think that contractors will be too expensive, and I think that we can delegate a certain amount to a person on staff who takes the job seriously and can come up with some creative approaches.
Councilmember Schultz.
I'm in favor of us putting some money toward a environmental sustainability coordinator. And I don't say that glibly because when I first started thinking about this issue, I was opposed to the idea. But I'm coming around, so it gives the rest of you hope. One thing is that I'm intrigued by a number of the ideas that were brought to us by the task force. But the concern that I have, it comes at it from maybe the opposite end of the telescope, if I can sort of use a stupid analogy. And that is that I can understand the ambition to want to come up with $185,000 in a budget in order to get this thing going and get it going up to speed as fast as we can. But I'm just sort of wondering out loud, and maybe this is a kind of a question for the city manager in a sense, and that is that it may not be possible for us in a practical sense to actually spend $185,000 in a particular fiscal year on these kind of things. It's because this is not like putting money aside to pave roads, where everybody knows exactly what we're talking about. What we're talking about here is a range of programs, some of which, most of which the city has no experience with. And if we're going to contract with somebody to do that, first of all, we, the city council, and the staff have to figure out what it is we want to contract for. You have to write up a scope of services. And if you're going to have an intelligent set of bids come in, those services that we're going to ask for, that scope of services, has to be well-defined. Otherwise, people are just going to not bid because they're not going to understand exactly what it is we want. So that's going to require some discipline on our part. And then we've got to get that advertised. We'll have responders, individuals, ranging from individuals who are expert in various fields to companies that have multiple talents to offer us, and then go through that process. And then I think also from just looking at the substance of what we're going to be getting involved in, is that a lot of this is a thought process, a thinking process of looking and exploring programs, seeing what's being done in other communities in the United States, why some have succeeded, why others haven't, and that sort of thing. And before we can begin to actually spend hard money on environmental improvements. I mean, for example, I'm intrigued by the idea of the city being able to purchase its street lamps. But I know enough, I've learned enough to realize that it's not as easy as we think it is. It's a lot of potential problems. The idea of a solar co-op. I think is a fascinating idea, and I'm convinced it'll save us money over the long run. So you get a report back from a consultant that tells you, well, these are the sorts of things we need to do. Then we have to digest that and decide, and that's a burden on us. It's going to require time and getting ourselves up to speed to evaluate whether this makes sense, whether we can do it or not, and when we can do it, and where we start. So, I mean, just putting it into a budget, $185,000 or some other figure, doesn't make it happen. And I agree, I'm wholeheartedly in support of getting this thing started, but I don't see it's not like we need to accomplish everything that the TFEA report came up with in year one. I think as much as we can set aside $5 million for this thing, but it doesn't mean we're going to get $5 million of results and get all of these projects figured out and implemented. It's going to take us years, I think, in some cases, because some of these proposals that may come back could be very controversial, even among fellow environmentalists who might say, well, there's a better way to skin that cat. So I guess the question for the city manager is here, where have we, without going too deep into history, spent that kind of money, say $185,000, on a consultant? Have we had experience doing that where it's been, we've been able to budget it and sort of large contract? Because to me, for a city, that seems like a large number.
I'm going to ask Sarah to correct me if I'm wrong. The things that I can think of off the top of my head, and I don't know if the dollar amount, Councilmember Schultz, was quite that high, was perhaps some of the Ethan Allen Gateway work. I think that was in the six figures. Is that correct, Sarah?
Excuse me, if I recall correctly, we spent about $120,000 for consultants in the development of the New Hampshire Avenue corridor plan, and that included basically a team of a variety of subcontractors with areas of expertise ranging from transportation to economic development to urban design, et cetera.
Was that done in one fiscal year?
Yes, though there was a little bit of a carryover.
Okay. That's really the thing, Councilmember Schultz, that comes to mind.
And if I can just add, I want to try and anticipate what Councilmember Wright's going to say, which is that his full 180 is not necessarily just for the contractor, it's for the contractor and other pieces where we would need to spend money.
Right.
Yeah.
I think, Councilmember Schultz, you accurately sort of outlined what the city's proposal process is. Clearly, after listening to all the council members, both before the budget process and during it, it's very clear that this is a high priority for the council, and that would translate into getting the proposal draft together and sharing that with the council, in a timely fashion. There are some items on Councilmember Clay's list, for example, that truthfully are a matter of legislation for the part of the council, whether you want to ban plastic bags within the city or some of the, two-cycle engines. Those are things that the council could choose to do whenever you wanted to. It wouldn't have to wait, and there's really not a dollar impact of doing that. It's just a matter of policy on the part of the council. I've heard the council that you don't want to spend an entire fiscal year, understandably, just studying something. We would need to get someone on board fairly quickly, get the proposal clearly outlined, and then, obviously plan to do some implementation during fiscal year 12. Exactly how that shakes out in terms of timing and what that means for money, I think a lot will probably depend on the council and how fast you work through things. If I may, Mayor, just while I kind of have the floor briefly, I know Councilmember Wright has expressed interest in increasing the subsidy for the bulk buy tree program. What I would just suggest, because we have had some internal discussions about that, is put it either draw some more money out of the tree fund to increase the subsidy, or put it all in stormwater. I just think it becomes a little unwieldy from an accounting standpoint to split it between funds. So I guess if that's something that you all are interested in, if you could give us that direction, just pick which source of funding you would like to use.
Okay. Councilmember Wright, did you have...
I wanted to, in addition to what you said, Mayor, I think that's right. It's not just the hiring the consultant, and we might not hire just one consultant depending on the priorities that we come up with throughout the year, or specifically what we want to do, what implementation costs. But I also think it will be relatively easy to find a way to spend that money based on all the recommendations of the TFE. And I'm confident that I would prefer to have the money in the budget at a level that's significant. It's saying we're taking a step forward. And I'm confident the city manager is not going to recommend that we spend the money frivolously. And that there's, Ruben and I have documented it many times, there's times in the history where we don't spend everything that we anticipate that we're going to spend. Of course, you want to try and be as accurate as possible, so I'm not suggesting we should overinflate the number, but anytime you're doing something new, there's unknown with it. And I would just prefer to err on the side of going with the 185, and so I think if people, I think it would be good if people could think about finding that, getting to that number. But I respect everyone's opinion on it.
And I just wanted to add one thing. Streetlights have come up a couple times in this discussion. I convened a meeting today of Montgomery County chapter folks dealing with the street lighting issue. Deputy City Manager Ludlow and I were there representing the city. There were about, 15 people at the meeting. It was a 2-hour discussion about streetlights and about what other municipalities are currently doing, the information that they have, how to coordinate that with the county, how to deal with it in terms of the Pepco rate case. I was going to bring this up under the Pepco rates, legal fees, dollar figure. I'll just say at this point that I learned a lot today about where things are with streetlights and possibilities of doing things, and had a little bit better appreciation of some of the regulatory hurdles to doing that, and some of the hurdles that are also associated with dealing with the current owners of the streetlights. Even though we pay for them, they still own them, et cetera, et cetera. Suffice it to say, it's not a simple issue. I think that there's going to be more work that's going to be done in a cooperative manner with our fellow municipalities, and that I'm hopeful will lead to some progress on that issue. It's not something that I can necessarily discuss now, but just wanted to let you know that we made some significant progress on that today.
Bruce?
Yes.
Has there been any discussion on the Municipal Energy Authority in that context with the other municipalities that you've heard?
No. And so I think where we are, well, okay, we'll get more comments. And then what I was going to do was basically put the amount up for bid. And we'll start at a higher figure, and we'll drop until we've got consensus or majority or whatever it might be. But Councilmember Clay and then Councilmember Robinson. Okay, sorry.
I would support $185,000 if we can come up with $185,000. I mean, I think there's $185,000 worth of activities to engage in, because there are a wide variety of activities. And the list that I put out, some of them are just legislative, but some of them are bigger things that we probably would want to have some time to work on, like a revolving loan fund for energy-efficient buildings. I mean, that would take a while before we have to put in a big capital amount for that. But it's something that we would have to do a report on. It would be something very, somebody with very specific skill sets that might be different than our approach to our generalist person. Same with the lending institutions. And then there's the climate change piece. But, for example, the municipal utility piece, I think, also, very specific, something that we would want to get information on first. We do have a plan, and it sounds like we are moving forward around the street light issues and the Pepco issues and all of that, and I believe it's one of our other reconciliation items is to kick money in for the joint MML chapter activities around this, which would be money that wouldn't be a part, that's not part of the money that we're talking about for the Green Initiative, right?
And
It's just the legal dollars.
And I'll say at this point that my sense from today's meeting was that I was going to basically withdraw that request at this point.
Oh, okay.
And say that we will, I would rather come at it once we've got a better handle on what it is, because that was a, gee, I don't know what it needs to be, put a placeholder figure in there, and I have no idea whether that is too much, too little, I just don't know. So as we work through that, I think it'll be much clearer, and we'll come back with something where we can basically, we'll have to do either a budget amendment in this fiscal year or a budget amendment in next fiscal year with a lot harder data.
Okay. So the tree inventory is a good example of something that then would be sort of not 360, because that'd take you back to the same spot, 180 degrees around from the municipal utility or the streetlight purchases, and it begs the question of whether or not, if that's what we want to have, is this tree inventory, and we don't want to add a staff person, could we put in some money and do provide internships for people, like somebody who's working on their master's degree in landscape architecture, helping us come up with a tree plan, but having some internship money to pay them for graduate stipend or things. So there's all kinds of things. There's the pieces in the transportation as well, and around the stormwater. I mean, we could talk about if we want to do more stormwater related things, and we have a stormwater piece that's different. Do we want to make a change to the stormwater fee so that we can pick up the costs for the tree plantings and the on-site retention and those sorts of things, so that they're linked into the stormwater piece? So I guess before I picked a particular amount of money that I wanted to have here, I mean, it'd be nice, like, is there any money in play? To talk about what money is in play right now, or where would this come from, kind of a thing. So are we creating another wish list, and then we'll go back and look and see how much we could cut, and then we'll come back and revisit our wish list and see what doesn't make it, or does that make sense? Or
You have any comments?
I'm almost afraid to weigh in, but I'll go ahead and do it anyway. One thing I would just remind the council, from the time I submitted my budget to you is net of some other changes. You do have $103,775 that has been added to general fund revenues. We are still cautiously optimistic, hopeful, that we may get some additional funding from Montgomery County from the tax duplication issue. Certainly I think it's a matter of whatever the council is comfortable with, but one option you could consider is to go ahead and allocate the entire almost $104,000 to, environmental sustainability initiatives, with a commitment to pledge whatever you get from tax duplication, or some portion of that, to that kitty, if you will. That's just a suggestion. Obviously, it depends on the timing of when you want to make your decision on the allocation for green initiatives.
okay.
Councilmember Robinson and then Councilmember Wright.
I'd hope that we would leave ourselves out to readdress any of these issues that we're covering tonight if it turns out that we just don't have the money, rather than just punt and say, oh, well, the 58 cents tax rate, that won't cover it, let's go to 60 or what have you. So, I mean, I hope we would keep the flexibility to come back to these things if we needed to.
Councilmember Wright.
I don't think anyone's talking about going over the 58-cent tax rate regardless. To me, I think it's if we can find the money. I think the money can be found. I think one of the nice things about the way we're talking about structuring this is we haven't talked about adding a staff position or something that's truly an ongoing commitment, which also makes sense in the case of still being in a relatively uncertain future budget situation. So, ideally, we'd like to be able to commit this amount in future years to kind of the budget steadiness issue, but it's also an area where if there was something drastically different in 2013, we could pare back. And so it does seem to me between that money, potential other future money, as well as still having a relatively healthy amount of money we're committing to both these replacement reserves, as well as still having general funds. It seems feasible to me. It's sort of like, I think we have to decide on the number, and then along a lot of these things, then have Barb come back to us and say, hey, this seems doable, or no, I can't, it doesn't work. You guys have to make some trade-offs.
Yeah, just let me say that I think it's helpful for us to come up with a dollar figure that we're comfortable with, recognizing that we may not spend it all. We may say we need more, and we have a budget amendment process to go through where we can do that. We have, depending on where we are in a year, we have unappropriated reserves, we have other ways of looking at things, and we have, as the city manager mentioned, a potential for another revenue source getting into play for the 2012 budget that we won't know until we're in the process of voting on the budget, probably between first and second reading.
Correct. The other thing, I'm a little uncomfortable saying this because I don't know that you go into a budget with this expectation, but obviously the charter does mandate that we budget a certain amount for the general contingency account. In most years, we do not spend that. So it's essentially funding that you are required to set aside as an expenditure with no specific purpose for its allocation.
So we've got some flexibility if we come up with a number that we think is in the ballpark. Councilmember Snipper.
Yeah, one quick observation, which is that I gather from the discussion, there seems to be a consensus that we'd hire a contractor, that the 185 includes a contractor and some money to do work. The money to do work, as was pointed out, wouldn't actually occur until later on. So if it turned out we were having trouble coming up with the money, you just do less, and put it into a future year. So we're not locking ourselves into actually being committed to spend 185. We haven't really put it in concrete even. So I think we have a nice...
Whether it's staff or contractor, right?
Or staff or contractor. Just the concrete.
And it depends on whether it's 185 or some other figure.
Or some other figure. No, my point is that we've built in a little flexibility in the design of the thing, that if it turns out we needed to pull back for some reason, we could.
Okay. So would it be fair to say that we all want to put some money in for a sustainability coordinator, contractor, some associated monies, and all we have to do is come up with the amount that we're comfortable with as a group? Councilmember Robinson.
I'd prefer an employee, but if I'm outvoted on contractor, then so be it.
Okay. How many are in favor of a contractor? And employee? Well, 5-2. So we're going with a contractor at this point. Amount of money. I'll start high and we'll see where we go. 185. I see 3 votes. The next, I don't know, 150 was the next figure mentioned. And that gets 150, and I think we're there. Councilmember Schultz, what number are you comfortable with?
I don't think I have to say.
Was it 175?
I'm not showing my cards.
You have to pay to see, right?
You didn't have to pay to see.
But it's contingent upon finding the money. I mean, 'cause the
Correct.
other question is, what's
Correct.
the lowest amount you would accept?
That is another way to look at it.
Oh, a range. Do a range.
We don't have
We got
to
to
do
put
that
money
right
in the
now.
budget. We got to try and find money to put in the budget. Is the city manager comfortable with working with the 150, or would you like a range?
I would rather have a specific number, and I will work with whatever figure the majority of the council is comfortable with.
Okay. Unlike Councilmember Schultz, I decided I would, what's the word I want? Heal into the 150. If I'd had to, I would have held out for the 110, because I like the certain symmetry of saying there was the Miller paver that was around that kind of covered the, well, gee, this is the HUR money, and this is, putting it toward the HUR, yada, yada, yada. But, I don't need to go there, but I thought I'd get a shot at it anyway. That's why my 110.
You're as unprincipled as I am.
I've made comments along those lines in public on camera before. I'm not going to go there again.
Or I just want to say, assuming we can find the money.
Yes.
Now, there were additional proposals from Councilmember Schultz, and what I had down was money for gang resources, street sweeping changes, including alternate side of the street parking with associated posting, and a possible supplemental grant to the Tacoma Park Independence Day Committee. Councilmember Schultz, you want to make a pitch for any of those?
Since I put those ideas forward, I've gotten a lot of constructive feedback from staff with regard to the gang issue. Police chief has said, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, that basically he has the resources in hand now to manage the gang issue adequately in his estimation. So I will go by that, because I have no better, I have faith in the chief's judgment, basically. What was the next one?
Street sweeping.
I got a very constructive feedback from Director of Public Works. It looks like the cost of doing that would be rather considerable. Certainly way out of proportion, and I'm not going to go into the details of it, because I just don't think we need to do that if I'm not going to sit here and fight for it, because I'm not. I think what I was trying to solve was the problem that the certain parts of our streets never seem to get swept because of the nature of the lives of people that live in Tacoma Park, where both adults, or whoever lives, the adults in a household, are often not home during 5 days of the work week. Certain cars are always in the same spot when the street sweeper comes around, and as a result, all kinds of stuff just sits there for weeks and weeks and weeks and just never gets moved.
Are you proposing a tow truck?
No. I was proposing alternate side of the street, but that also, as Darrell Braithwaite explained, brings up all kinds of who would basically force the city to go to a once-a-month street sweeping process rather than two times or a month. They would create an expenditure with regard to putting up beaucoup signs, and then you'd also have the question of enforcement. As if somebody is supposed to move their vehicle from one side to the other and don't, then what do you do about that? And if you don't do anything about it, then you don't have any teeth, and so you end up right back where you started.
I want you to know that the city of San Francisco makes a mint of money by having a parking officer follow the street sweeper around, and I have funded many items for the city of San Francisco.
Well, having lived in Manhattan at a certain point in my life where the whole culture of the city is influenced by opposite side of the street parking, and people build their lives around the timing of what time they have to get out and move their car. It's like a huge gambling scenario. I don't want to see that happen either in this city. But I know. I mean, they really have to. Next, what was the other?
And just let me make one quick comment on the street sweeping. I was I was happy to understand the possibilities of what we could do short of going there to get better results in talking with Public Works Director and what has been going on in North Tacoma that we talked about a little bit in terms of getting more information out to the community and having a way for residents of the city to understand very clearly what we do with the street sweeping program and how they can improve the results by knowing and anticipating when the sweeper is going to come. So I think we have some ways to improve that will actually build community without spending money.
Yeah, I think part of that is that Darrell Braithwaite said that with the new street sweeper, the sweeping can be much more regulated. The schedule can be maintained, and that way people can be literally better informed. She can better inform the community that, in fact, such and such a street is going to be swept on such and such a day, which has not been possible, except in sort of generalities to this point in time.
Yes. The last item was the possible supplemental grant to the Tacoma Park Independence Day Committee.
Well, this is not something that's been put forward in a public forum so much, but we did get a handout at the beginning of the meeting today from the Tacoma Park Independence Day Committee, and some of that's been sort of discussed on email already, so it's not new to any of us sitting up here. The Independence Day Committee is proposing making some, depending on how you look at it, some might say there's significant changes in the formatting of the parade. Others might say that these changes are really not significant. I'll let that be the judgment of others. But one of the things that was pointed out in this is that it's hard to find volunteers, that there's a lot of heavy lifting, quote unquote, to get things done. It just takes a lot of people hours, and that the committee just doesn't have the volunteers that they feel are adequate to do all the things that we've done in the past, and therefore that's the underpinning for this, and that they harken back to the days of Belle Ziegler, who was a staff person in our recreation department who carried a lot of that burden, and now that we don't have that kind of a person now, so it's virtually most of the heavy lifting is just literally has to be done by volunteers. And it occurred to me that maybe setting some additional money aside, in addition to the money we already gave to them in a large grant format, and I'm not talking about a lot of money, maybe $5,000 or $1,000 or so, would enable the Independence Day Committee to pay people to do some of the work, not necessarily the thinking and planning work, but just some of the carrying out work. That way they don't have to worry about volunteers not showing up and whatever other issues one has with volunteers, but they'll have some reliability and certainty that certain things can get done according to a specific schedule to make sure that the parade, so that the committee can do as much as it possibly wants to get the annual parade to be done correctly. I mean, we would all wish that there was an abundance of volunteers, but for whatever reason, there isn't, and they note that the costs of doing this parade go up every year. Part of that, I guess, is just the nature of doing anything, that things just get more expensive. So on my own, I kind of thought, well, maybe it's worth thinking about trying to help this committee out so that it's not 100% volunteers, that they will have some spending money to hire some workers, or maybe 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, whatever they need to do to supplement the resources that they have.
Other comments? Councilmember Clay?
We haven't actually received a request from the Independence Day.
No, we have not. They're not asking for this money.
Right.
This is my idea.
Okay. So I would suggest that I'd like to keep the reviewing stand even if the city sets it up. So I think that I don't actually like being in parades. There's been many parades in San Francisco, but I like being in the 4th of July parade because I get to see a lot of the constituents and they get to see us out there and supporting the community. And I like being able to support all the floats as they come by. So I guess I would like the city to take over setting up the facilities for the city council, and I'm fine with walking or riding bicycles, or I will rent a car for my mother to ride in, or I will rent a rickshaw from somebody and I will ride her around in my bicycle, as she also has come to love coming out for the 4th of July parade, and she flies out here just for it. So, but it would be nice to be able to get a ride up to the top of the hill, so maybe the city could take all the council members who are going to walk or ride the rest of the way up to the top of the hill in our van, so we could start off up there, and maybe other dignitaries who also decide that they will leave their cars at home and walk or ride the parade route, and alleviate the Tacoma Park Independence Day Committee of the job of taking care of the council during the parade, and the other officials. So we would host them.
Councilmember Robinson.
I think it's these 2 points that are at issue that are brought up in the letter. Councilmember Siemens, you can correct me. It's whether to have the raised reviewing stand and whether to have cars, organized for cars to bring dignitaries, drive dignitaries around. And I think it's a good idea not to organize the cars just from a green perspective, if nothing else. Although I know that it's harder. You said in your letter, or the Independence Day Committee said in the letter, that it is harder to do that part. And I'm also okay not having a reviewing stand. The last couple times I've been up there have been relatively few, very few dignitaries, if that's what we're after. And maybe one on the ground, the way it's described in the letter, is a good idea. And in any case, I'd like to let the Independence Day Committee call the shots on how they're organizing things, and I don't particularly like the idea of us organizing parts of it and getting into it with them. So I'm not hearing them ask for money. I don't see a reason to do it, and I don't see any reason to go against their recommendations.
Councilmember Siemens.
I would like to defer to Councilmember Wright and Councilmember Snipper first.
Councilmember Snipper.
I support the proposal of Councilmember Clay. I like the reviewing stand. I think it helps give a center to the focus, to the parade. I'm agnostic about the cars. I do like riding my bike around. That was fun. And I'll stop there.
Councilmember Wright.
I'm fine without having the cars. I think, to me, I'm open to paying for the reviewing stand if the committee came to us and said they wanted us to pay for it, but I haven't heard that request yet. So I think it seems odd if they have a way that they're thinking the parade might run differently and they want to do it without a reviewing stand. That would be okay with me. Or if they feel like they can't afford it and they do want to make the case for the city, then I'm open to it. I just haven't. It feels a little bit odd with the committee not asking us specifically to fund it to do it.
City manager has a comment.
Darrell, please correct me if I'm wrong, but your budget already anticipated that the city would be setting up the reviewing stand. Certainly I'm going to defer to Councilmember Siemens, but my sense is that the issue has more to do with some of the other aspects of the reviewing stand and the hosting and the refreshments, but the budget that I submitted always assumed that the city would be setting up the reviewing stand as we have in past years. So.
Yes, that's right.
The city always erects the reviewing stand for the committee. I would just refer back. I certainly can't speak for the Independence Day Committee, but I refer back to the letter, and they mention a couple of reasons in there that for changing the reviewing stand this year, and in fact, I think they, indicated that they still plan to have the location for city council members to view the parade as it goes by, just without the raised stand. I think one of the big issues that was mentioned in there is the refreshments, that, again, as a budget savings thing, were sandwiches and refreshments had been supplied in the past, that they were suggesting to cut back on that. But, I can go on about this, and we can all speculate. I think probably what I would like to suggest is that, Barb, you meet with Gene Herman, who's the president of the Independence Day Committee, and I think you understand the feelings of the council at this point, and I suggest you work it through with him, because it really is not a city committee, but it certainly is a supportive organization that has worked closely with the city in the past. So I think that would be the easiest way to handle that. And I think the amount of money that Councilmember Schultz is suggesting is not something that really needs a major decision at the budget time. I think you probably have that in your back pocket. You could provide if necessary.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that if the council would like me to.
Did you have further comment, Councilmember?
Yeah, it's just now that it's clear that the city would put up with a viewing stand, and the actual burden of that is not part of the committee's, doesn't need to be part of the committee's concern. I was just looking back at this letter, and if I may read one sentence out of this. It says, in addition, we hope the absence of a formal raised reviewing stand, and I guess this is as distinguished from just a on-the-ground thing that's a canopy. We hope the absence of a formal raised reviewing stand will discourage lengthy performances from parade participants. This causes a backup of groups, stoppage of flow, and makes the parade seem much longer than it actually is. That's what they say, and I don't personally think that makes much sense to me, because I think the performance of the groups in front of the reviewing stands is one of the highlights of the parade, and if it takes a long time to get people through, but I never heard that this was a problem, but maybe it is a problem. That's all I wanted to add.
And I'll just throw my 2 cents in real quick. I know that the theme this year is going to be going green, and there seems to be a movement that is inexorable toward not using cars in the parade, particularly for dignitaries. And I'm not going to stand in the middle of the street and say, "Stop, you're all wrong." But I think cars have a place in the parade, and I always look forward to riding in an open car. And if the idea is going green, I think I'm going to have to try and come up with a vehicle that I can ride in that will be greener. And that's my issue, but it's just
a couple years ago.
Progress sometimes is not the way to go.
A while ago there was someone with a rickshaw. You might want to talk to Jeff. Just a suggestion.
He reached your milestone of tonight some time ago. And if people really feel that it's important not to have fossil fuel burning vehicles in the parade, then they should not have any fossil fuel vehicles, burning vehicles in the parade. And it shouldn't just be dignitaries, it should be, say, no gasoline burning vehicles in the parade, period.
Can we vote on that?
But it didn't stop the committee from requesting me to make available my truck for the band again this year, which burns a whole lot more gas than anything else. So it's kind of a dichotomy there that I think people just generally isn't as simple as people think. Councilmember Clay.
I mean, I would agree. I don't see a real strong connection between the convertibles that the dignitaries ride in the green stuff. When every year we see the giant white truck that has no purpose in the parade whatsoever follow behind the steel bands because they don't want to park their truck somewhere. And so we have, that giant truck that idles all the way through all the time and holds things up and is itself a gap in the parade. So there's kind of a disconnect for me between what this is and what this says that it's going to do. And that's why I think that the easiest thing to do is for the council to manage their own piece of how the council and the other dignitaries come along. And I don't think it costs that much, or that it's inappropriate for the city to fund the whatever the catering is for people to come. And I think that it would then behoove us all to make an effort to get those folks to come along. If it was decided that it wasn't okay for the city to do that, I would be happy to share the cost of that with any of the other council members who would like to share the cost with that. I'm okay with that. And the last thing that I would say is that the videotaping of the parade, I think a lot of the content of the videotape gets captured in front of the reviewing stand where the people stop and do the performance. And so if you're not coming to the parade and you watch it on the video, that's where you see...
You see people going like this.
Well, but, they said, they stop and perform. That's where you see the performance of that entity, is when they do their gig in front of the reviewing stand. And having been in the marching band for several years and through many parade performances, when we were in the parades and the competition, we frequently had amount of time where we had to get through the reviewing area, so you couldn't slow down. And if you had some little thing that, little flourish that you were going to do, it had to fit within your time period. And if you didn't get out of the area, which was marked with tape, in the amount of time that you had allocated, you got disqualified.
So I think we have more than enough feedback on those proposals from Councilmember Schultz, and I think from my hearing of the comments that we're not going to consider any of them.
Okay.
Is that accurate, people?
I feel like I had my day in court.
Okay. Now the bailiff will escort you back to the jail.
That's right.
Okay. The next item is possible alternate scenarios for council enrollment in the state pension plan. I had a request on this one that some of my colleagues thought might sound like a good idea. Let me just say that my intent was to try and save the city money in the long run, given that it seems that council members have to be enrolled in the state pension system. I've had some discussion with the city manager about how that might work. My sense is we're not totally clear about how that might work. The intent was to save money. That may or may not be the case if we go in retroactive. Do you want to say anything about that?
Sure. Just to recap for anybody who may be watching and isn't familiar with the issue, is apparently back in the 2004 legislative session, which was shortly before I started with the city, there was a state law that was passed that apparently almost no one knew about. MML did not know about it. And it doesn't appear that the state retirement system, in talking to the staff, such as Karen, who were here at the time, did much to notify people. So this issue actually came up as part of an audit that the state retirement system did in 2010. One of the audit finding was that they brought up this law and said that elected officials who took office after the law's passage were subject to participation in the state retirement fund. So it was new elected officials. So of the 7 of you sitting on the council at this time, 6 of you would be subject to this law. Mayor Williams would only come into play because he changed offices, and Councilmember Siemens has continuously served during that time period, and therefore would not be eligible. As we often do when these things come up, these cities request to the state retirement system to try to minimize both the impact on the city financially as well as sitting council members, was that the law be applied prospectively, which is why you saw funding in the FY12 budget. What's unclear, because I wasn't aware that there was any interest on the part of the council of possibly trying to go back retroactive, is how this would impact us. One is the request that we made of the state retirement system for the law to be applied prospectively is simply that, a request. Our sense is that the state may be amenable to that because I do think they recognize they have not publicized this change in the law as they perhaps should have. But that remains to be seen. If the law is applied retroactively, at a minimum, I think the cost to the city would be just over $26,000. The impact for each of you sitting on the council, with the exception of Councilmember Siemens, it would range depending on the time period on which you have served on the council. Councilmember Schultz would be on the low end as the newest member of the council, and this is, I'm talking about from when you took office after the law's passage in 2004, so for most of you that would be 2006, or thereafter through FY11. Councilmember Schultz, at a minimum, would probably need to pay $1,500 or in that range to the state retirement system, and the high would probably be the mayor at about $3,200. One of the things that we are unclear on is whether or not the state retirement system would assess interest charges for the fact that the money was not paid in at the appropriate time. Karen Hampton, our Human Resources Manager, made a call today and talked to a customer service rep at the state retirement system who suggested that there might be an interest charge of 5%. That struck me as a little bit odd because the actuarial assumed earnings rate for the state retirement system is actually 7.75, so if I were a state retirement official, I don't know where 5% comes from. I would apply the rate that the state otherwise would have assumed it would have earned on this money being in the system. But certainly we'd need to do a lot more research if the council is interested in going back retroactive. With the 5% figure that was thrown out to Ms. Hampton, it's not clear if that would be on the total amount or if it would be 5% for every year that the money should have been in the plan. So I think the figures I threw out for the city of just over $26,000 and the range of $1,500 to $3,200 for council members should be viewed as very preliminary in nature. We would need to do a lot more, have a lot more conversation with the state and find out how they would deal with this issue.
And the other piece of it is that my sense had been that with the change in the state law going into effect July 1 of this year in terms of the contribution rate and the vesting rules and things like that, my sense had been that if we went in retroactively rather than prospectively, that we would come under less onerous funding requirements, and that would affect the requirements in an ongoing way. My sense from talking to you earlier is that may not be the case, that they would change July 1 anyway, so that going retrospective would only add cost rather than in the long run reduce cost.
That's correct. Our understanding is that the rates that would be applied to the city and to each of you would be the rates that were in effect at that period of time, excluding the interest issue that we're not really clear on. The rates for the participants changed over that time period. The rates for the city changed over that time period. And regardless of when you go into the system, all participants in the state retirement system will see an increase in their contribution from 5% to 7%, effective July 1st of 2011. My guess, Mayor Williams and the rest of the council, is I think there may be a benefit to each of you personally of going retroactive, in the sense that my guess would be that the old vesting rules for the state retirement system would probably be what you would fall under as opposed to the new ones.
Which would make it 5 years instead of 10 years.
I believe so. Once again, we could certainly try to look into this a little bit further, but that's probably the one difference I would probably see would be the vesting schedule that would be applied to each of you. The other thing I would just throw out there, because I did have I was at a meeting last week with Scott Hancock, the Executive Director of MML. This was obviously something we had talked to him about when this first came up, in part because, we had never heard of it. And second of all, as I had mentioned to the council in an email, when this first came up in the audit findings, one of the other findings was that I should have been in the state retirement system. And basically, I was seeking MML's help because that had an associated price tag to the city of over $60,000. If you had to go back retroactively and enroll me, working with the pension attorney for the police pension fund, who I reached out to because he does know people at the state retirement system, and just kind of working through the law, we were able to get me excluded on the basis that I do have an employment agreement, and there was an exception in the law for those they considered to be contractual employees. But one of the things that Scott Hancock threw out is, whether or not the city had any interest in working with the District 20 delegation to try to get this law changed. That's obviously something the council can decide at a future date. I know you will be having some discussions, I think, in another month or so about your legislative priorities, and this may be something that you want to take up. But for right now, we are where we are.
Councilmember Clay?
So it says that the mayor pays the most money, but once you exclude Councilmember Siemens, I'm actually the person who's been in their specific position the longest. So is it based on salary, or is it?
It is all state retirement contributions. It's going to be a function of two things. The mayor's position in Tacoma Park, pays more than the council position. Mayor Williams obviously has, well, I think you came on in 2006, didn't you?
Yes.
Okay. So you would have the same amount of time. The mayor's salary would be higher than yours, so your amount would be slightly less, my recollection, Councilmember Clay, and I can certainly send...
You came on in 2008 as mayor.
As mayor?
Does this...
No, 2006. Oh, no, you're right, 2008.
I'm sorry.
November of 7.
Right,
And
okay,
you
I'm
came on
sorry.
in November of 5.
Okay, so you would actually have
You would
more
have that.
time then, but at a lower rate.
Okay.
So we're probably about even.
No, I believe Councilmember Clay, I can look up the figure tomorrow for each of you, because Karen did some rough calculations, but I believe the figure for you was in the range of $2,700 to $2,800.
Okay.
From what I recall.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to spending that.
Isn't that great?
It's great. No, I support it, absolutely. I'm
So
on board.
is it
I'm a yes.
something that we want to pursue? Councilmember Robinson?
Just to review, the money comes back to us if we don't vest.
That's correct.
And if we do vest, some amount comes back to us, which includes both the contribution we make and the contribution that the city makes over time. Is that correct?
Yes, if you do
It's a
vest,
formula.
this would be one of those retirement benefits that you all have been talking about
Yes.
for some time.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Wright?
So I'm just not quite sure I understand the proactive versus, I think I understand everything but the proactive versus retroactive versus the go forward.
From now.
Yeah, the go forward versus
Right. What the city had noted in its response to the audit findings is that this is a law that a legal change that apparently no one knew anything about, and that the state retirement system had an obligation to be notifying people of this. So what we had requested of the state, which would be the typical thing we would do if anything comes up, is to ask that the law be applied prospectively, beginning July 1st of 2011.
Right.
And that's what we have assumed for budgetary purposes. The state could turn that request down. Our initial sense is they may be amenable to that. But, obviously, if the council has a different feeling and you want to go back in, for us to tell the state, the city wants to just go back to the time the law was implemented.
But that'll cost the city significant.
Probably at least $26,000.
Oh, so prospectively doesn't cost you anything?
Prospectively, it will cost the city something, but that's already been accounted for in the budget that was submitted to you. If there is a desire to go back, for each of you, whatever the relevant time period would be, we would need to pay it at some point. We would need to check to see whether the state would want that to go in prior to June 30th, which is a possibility, in which case you probably need to amend the budget amendment that you considered earlier tonight, or whether the state would allow that to be paid sometime in FY12, in which case it would be a budget reconciliation item, and that would need to be added for the city's contribution. And then we would have to work with each of you to collect the money that each of you would owe, with the exception of Councilmember Siemens.
So I'm not in favor of going retroactive. I would just go forward unless it seems like we have a pretty good case, unless the state requires that we do it. But I don't.
Yeah, and my original sense had been that if we went retrospective, that it would change not only the vesting rule, but the contribution rate, not only that it would somehow then change and affect things in the prospective sense after July 1. That appears not to be the case. So that was the original intent was, gee, we can save money in something that we're being forced to do, and the city can save money in something that we're being forced to do. That appears not to be the case.
So you'd advocate also for just going the go forward, not the retrospective?
I kind of feel like I have to advocate for that because I would be voting in my own self-interest and costing the city money, and that kind of doesn't.
That's what I thought. But I want
feel too good.
To be clear, I'd be sure that was your opinion.
Councilmember Snipper.
I had a question concerning if you withdraw the money, does the city get paid back?
Well, actually, Karen, I mean, the money is...
If you don't vest and you get your money back, does the city get its money back?
I don't think it's actually paid back to the city in terms of a cash contribution. I think it becomes part of the assets that are tied to the city's liability for...
But it's accounted for.
That's my understanding. We can certainly confirm that.
Right. Okay.
Councilmember Siemens.
I just had one question as far as whether there was any changes needed in the city code for council compensation.
It's an interesting question, and I know that it was something bandied about on some of the email exchanges between council members. We probably need to look at that. This is obviously an adjustment that will take place during a council term, but it's also something that's being imposed by the state, and it's a matter in which the city does not have any discretion.
I didn't expect you to have an answer tonight.
No, it's a valid point. We need to look into that, Councilmember Siemens.
And just a quick thought on that. If we did vote to go... No, it wouldn't. Councilmember Schultz.
It would be nice to figure out, which I'm incapable of doing at this point, a way for me to vote that would both benefit the city and me.
I thought we were going there at first.
Well, maybe we are. I don't think I have enough information, which is not a criticism because it's just we're still in the process of gaining information as to how this beast is going to get taken care of. So I think I'm probably not going to say what I think we ought to do because I don't understand it well enough to say, and then it might change again. So I would think we just ought to put a place marker in for the worst-case scenario into our budget and pray. But also I think it's something that ought to be talked about with our District 20 delegates because, you know, $1,500 is a, I mean, it's not like any of us are on the city council because we're thinking that if we don't get this salary, you know, we're going to lose our homes because we can't afford to pay our mortgage or something. But on the other hand, to take a 15% cut for something that I don't need, seeing as I'm well past what most people would consider a retirement age. My wife is already getting a nice monthly payment from the state retirement system, which I'd be paying into. The whole thing just seems sort of something like out of Joseph Heller's Catch-22. It's sort of like it is, but you just can't explain it to anybody, but it just has to be a certain way. So I reserve, I don't know how to come down on this.
Councilmember Robinson.
Well, the $10,000 I make every year does help me out in my life, and it is part of my income, and so it's not fluff for me. I think, and I take it very seriously.
Neither is it for me either.
Yeah, I take it very seriously, and I wouldn't want to vote to feather my own nest inappropriately. On the other hand, if it's a state law that's in play, then I'm comfortable adhering to the state law. And as far as going forward and going backward, if the state law said that we were supposed to be in it, then I'm for being in it. As far as the defined benefits versus the defined contributions, I'd rather it be defined contributions because it's or defined contribution because I think that's a better approach. But if the way it is defined benefits, then I'm comfortable doing that. So I would vote to go retroactively.
Councilmember Clay.
I just want to say that if I had been asked, do you want to be part of the state pension plan or not, I would have said, no, I don't want to be part of the state pension plan. I don't need to be part of the state pension plan for this part-time activity. But the fact is, the state legislature passed a law that defined us as in the state pension plan. And I don't see that as an increase in our compensation any more than if the federal government changed the ratio of Social Security benefits. And, you know, it's about benefits. It's not about salary. And I think people should understand that. So I'd have to come up with $2,700 in cash match this year, like right away. And then for the rest of the time that I'm a council member, my understanding is that $700 a year would come out of the stipend that the council members are paid.
So it's actually a reduction in the cash that you take home?
It's a reduction in the cash that the council members receive over the course of the next several years, however long you get voted into office. And if you're the mayor, it's more than $700 because it's whatever 7% of 13,000 is instead of 7% of 10,000.
So it's like 900 and something.
Yeah. So all I'm doing in voting to expend this money is to vote for the city to comply with the law as it currently exists. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to vote for the city to comply with the law as it currently exists. And I'm not sure how much money I would even expend trying to ask the District 20 delegation to change the law for us, because there are a lot of things that I'd like the District 20 delegation to expend their energy on, and quite frankly, this isn't one of them.
Councilmember Siemens.
I don't know whether I should be disappointed that I can't do this, or whether I should be happy that it isn't costing me money. I don't know.
So it sounds like we have a diversity of opinion about how this should play, and I'm not even sure we have a majority of us who could agree on any one particular direction to go.
Another normal discussion.
Yeah.
Let's twist Terry's arm.
I feel a little bit torn. On the one hand, I agree with it's kind of voting to have the city spend money where I'll benefit. On the other hand, it's voting to have the city follow the law. And I can be convinced by that argument as well. I think, that's a very valid argument. I was hoping for a win-win. It sounds like you can't get that out of this. Who's in favor of insisting that we go retroactively? I think I can go there. So I think we have a majority of the council who want to put in money in whatever year is appropriate, given what the state says we can or can't do.
I just throw an issue out there, just so I get some clarification from council. Obviously, the 26,000 plus is a good chunk of what we were looking to get to in terms of the sustainability initiatives. I'm assuming that this is a higher priority than that, or are they equally important? Am I supposed to be looking for both amounts of money as I bring the budget back before you, or how does the council juggle those? I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but it is a valid question, and the night is getting long, and I'd just like to make sure as I go to work on the numbers, if one, it may impact the other.
Councilmember Clay.
This is a vote to comply with the law as it currently stands, and I think it's the first priority.
Okay, that's what I need to know.
Councilmember Ray.
So I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that the law was passed, and we still have uncertainty about how that law is being interpreted by the people who are responsible for enforcing that law, related to retroactive or prospective. So I don't
like ADA sidewalk.
No, I mean, and that's the reality of how law is interpreted, enforced, and carried out. And so now I understand that there's some uncertainty there, right? And is that what you're saying? There's uncertainty there, and should we put money into the budget even if we do not know at this time that we're required to?
Well,
because we just voted and we said we weren't in favor of doing retrospective.
No, the council did vote. The majority of the council just voted that regardless of what, I think it's a question of whether the state feels that they did not do their due diligence in communicating this and what financial harm they want to cause to municipalities across the state. We're not the only ones who are in this vote, and to individual participants. Our other assumption has been that the state will not make us go retroactive for those who are no longer sitting on this council, who would have fallen into that time period, such as Donna Victoria, who was here this evening. I think the question, Councilmember Wright, is how the state interprets that request and whether or not there's an openness on their part just to apply it prospectively. What I have heard from the majority of the council is that we are to contact the state and say, don't worry about it being applied prospectively. The city will go ahead and contribute back to when the law went in effect and when individual council members would have become subject to it. So stemming from that, my question is simply, I think we're the council left to...
Maybe I missed it. Who voted in favor of going retrospectively?
Hands, I just counted sort of 4 hands down the,
1, 2, 3.
Right.
Oh, damn.
So, obviously, we'll work with the numbers as best we can, and certainly...
Could an individual council member, because it does affect us individually, ask that our case be handled prospectively?
I don't believe we can do that. I think staff had actually talked about that, recognizing there may be differences of opinions. I think you either fall under the umbrella of the city as a participant in the state retirement system. I think it's all for one or one for all, truthfully. I think it has to be done as a group.
So members are voting to cost the city more money, benefit themselves, and in theory comply with the law, and also require some other council members to meet that same retrospective threshold. I just want to be clear, that's what we're voting on.
Well, all we're doing is voting to adhere to the law. How it plays out is...
No, we still haven't, we could have an interpretation of what the law is. We haven't gotten that from...
But whatever the interpretation is, that's what we're voting to do.
No, might I
suggest that we...
asking the governing body to actually, we've proposed, can we go, we could ask them prospectively.
That's what we have asked.
Right.
Yeah.
And we haven't gotten an answer back.
No.
We're not even going to let them respond.
Can I suggest that we press the state for how they respond to, we think we should comply with the law, we should go retroactively. You haven't given us an answer. Talk to us about both of the options.
Sure, we can do that.
Because
I mean,
we don't have an
I
answer.
totally think we should comply with it, but it seems like there's a gray area here where we're waiting for an interpretation.
I think the law itself probably, if the city had known about the law, we probably would have been collecting from anybody who's passed through the council's doors during that time, which would have included Donna Victoria, trying to think who else took office. Doug Barry, possibly Joy Austin Lane. So really what the city's request had been was to limit the scope to those who are still currently serving, not to go back. I mean, I'm not sure what mechanism, truthfully, we would have to go back against people who are on the council.
It would be hard to go retroactively to somebody who obviously didn't vest.
Correct. So that was the request, is just to have it applied prospectively. Once again, we can certainly try to find someone at the state who's willing to make a decision on this and see if we can have that answer for you by the time you take up first reading of the budget ordinance.
And considering that it might even affect the current fiscal year.
That's correct, possibly.
Because I think an answer back from the state would be helpful.
Right, and like I said, I can get at least our guesstimate of what at least 6 of you would owe. Presumably that payment would be due at the same time the city makes its contribution. So if we're going back retroactively, basically everything needs to be kind of going in at the same time. So I will send that, at least a preliminary dollar figure that we have calculated for each of you. Once again, all the numbers may change depending on interest that may be assessed by the state.
And it may cause us to gulp when we see the interest.
Well,
I just have one question. How did the city attorney not know about this and alert us to the legal implication for the city?
Candidly, I haven't asked.
I'd like to know the answer to that question.
Yeah, I can't answer that. As I mentioned, when this issue first came up, especially with the prospective price tag that the city was looking at relative to my position and to me personally, knowing that we have a pension attorney that we work with on the police side, and he knows folks at the state retirement system, he was the first person we contacted to try to see if there was truthfully some way of carving me out of the equation because of the cost impact. And he was helpful in that regard in making some contacts to the state and perhaps suggesting some arguments that we might be able to put forward. But I have not talked to the city attorney's office about it, Councilmember Wright.
Councilmember Schultz?
I think it's not wise for us to be voting one way or the other on this. I think what we need is to get answers to the questions. All of us agree that the law is the law, but if and that we're going to comply with it, whether we like it or not. That's the way the law is. But if you don't understand the law, it's kind of like having a tax revenue, and if you don't know how to fill out your tax form, how the heck can you figure out what it is you owe? And I think what I would like is for us to get answers to what can be done, for each of us, what would be the cost if we went to me and to the city for going prospectively, and the same for going retroactively. And then, and if we have a choice, and I'm not sure that we do, because the state may say it has to be one way or not the other, but if we have a choice, then we can make an intelligent choice based on what it's going to cost the city and what it's going to cost us, and go from there. We don't have enough information to do that tonight, so that's why I suggested, just for the sake of putting together a budget, put in a placeholder for it, and let's get on with this discussion about it, the other things on the agenda.
Councilmember Stevens.
Thank you. I just wondered if, since we're seeking answers to a lot of different questions, if we could check and see if the council member who wasn't forced to do it could opt in if this turns out to be a gravy train.
I'm not sure it's a gravy train. It's taking money out of our pockets.
I'm just saying in case.
I'll sell you my slot.
A reminder, this is taking money out of our pockets, no matter what we do. Councilmember Clay.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, the characterization that this is somehow a vote that benefits us. Actually, that may not necessarily be the case at all. It's a question of whether or not you vest or not in the program, and, what could end up happening is that the state will just hold the money that I contribute for 20 years. I'm 46 years old, a little bit younger than Councilmember Siemens. I don't have a plan to be like camped out in my council seat for 20 years or anything. So, what could happen is just that the state holds my money for 20 years. So I think that
it doesn't pay you any interest.
It doesn't. They might just hold my money for 20 years and not pay any interest. And so, I thought about your comment. Well, the law is the law, except in Tacoma Park, where for some reason we have to fight every law that comes down the line. And I think there are important laws to fight. And I wouldn't put this at the top of the list. And my last point is that all we're voting right now is to put money into the budget. We're not actually voting to execute the plan. So let's put the money into the budget to comply with the law, and we'll get the information back later, as Councilmember Schultz said.
Okay. We have closure on that one. We have one final thing.
Can I make just one comment, just to clarify? The state would not, for any participant, the state would not be holding money for 20 years. As soon as you leave office, you're essentially considered a participant who has left the plan or is no longer actively employed. And you should be able to, yeah, you would be able to withdraw your individual contributions at that time.
Great.
So.
In which case, the council member would not gain or lose. The city would not gain or lose.
Well, except that we wouldn't earn interest on it the whole time they're all right.
True. So on balance, the only one who loses is the council member.
Right.
Okay, just a quick revisit of some things that we've kind of tentatively decided. It's a fairly quick list. We don't have to talk a lot about it. The right-of-way trash and recycling cans that Councilmember Schultz had requested at $1,600 each, did you have a figure you wanted to put in so that we could say yes or no?
4 of those times $1,600 would be $6,400. That would provide for 4 trash and 4 recycling cans in 4 different locations in Ward 6, according to the Director of Public Works.
My recollection is that we had generally been supportive of that. Does anybody have any comments, or do we want to say, yes, put that in? Seeing no comments, we want that in. Additional leaf collection on major streets, the ones that had only one, and this is to bring them up to 2 like everybody else at $3,900. We are continue to be happy with that one. Okay, yes. The money for the cable franchise legal fees at $4,300 or whatever figure seems appropriate. It looks like maybe the city manager has a little more information.
Yeah, in talking to Suzanne, I think $3,000 would be sufficient, and possibly less.
Okay, so $3,000. Councilmember Clay, you had a comment?
My comment is that I would want to subordinate these things underneath the green program pieces, and that's it.
Okay. And I propose that we don't put the placeholder amount for the Pepco rate legal fees at this point. Any problem with not putting that? Okay. And we had said the equipment replacement reserve funding at a level of $700,000 rather than the $750 in the city manager's budget. Are we still happy with that one? Seeing no lights, yes?
Yeah, I could. I'll put in my light.
Councilmember Snipper.
What I would like to see is reduce that to $600 this year, and then have the $600 in the future years. This is our, as a policy statement, doesn't lock any future council in, but for planning purposes, that number rise in the future years. So $600 the first year, and then some inflation adjustment in the out years.
Any further discussion, Councilmember Robinson?
Pardon me?
Are you moving that somehow?
I would like to move that, yeah.
I'd second
Well,
that.
we're not,
Well, this isn't a vote?
it's not a formal vote, we're straw voting, we're having discussion on straw voting, so we're not doing formal.
Okay, I'll straw second it.
Okay. Further comments? I'm much happier with the 700,000. I think we went through this and decided that we needed that level. The city manager provided with us with the, how that plays out in the out years, and I think it's much better to make the statement now that we need the higher funding level rather than lower with an inflation. I don't think that will be what we need. Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you. It makes it very easy. I agree with Bruce.
Councilmember Schultz.
We're talking 7 currently proposed in the budget, 750.
750 is in the city manager's proposed budget. We had tentatively agreed on 7 a week or so ago.
Oh, so the number, the operative number right now is 700.
Yes.
And Councilmember Snipper, I don't know what's the matter with me tonight, but I told you I'm past retirement age, is proposing 600.
Yes.
And the issue as I see it is that first, I think it's good to set a number that will be repetitive year after year, simply because it just makes it easier to just for everybody to do that rather than try and calculate a new number each year. And I think if you were to, and the thing is to be able to run those numbers out over 10, 15, 20 years and see if that sustains the need, maintains a balance sufficient to anticipate all the equipment expenses we're going to have and still not deplete it. Probably 600 is too low. I'm thinking that more like 650 would probably do it. But because I just, and the reason I'm nitpicking over, say, a relatively small amount of money is that we're still in a recession. We're still dealing with a tight budget here. And I just think that if we need to make adjustments in the out years, hopefully as the economy improves, that we will have a little bit more flexibility to do that in the out years. Of course, you could make the case that, who knows, it all could get a lot worse, but I don't think it's going to. I think we've been through the worst of this recession, and it's going to take a long time to get us out of it, but we're on our way. So that's my point of view.
So I've heard 2 at 6, 1 at 6:50, and 2 at 7. Any further comments? Councilmember Wright.
So I would do the 700. I think that's kind of a good conservative number. It's a little bit less than the city manager, but gets us in the right place. But I do support Councilmember Snipper's perspective and proposal that we should, I think, take a more diligent look at this and come up with some policy guidance for the city manager. But I don't think we necessarily need to do it in this budget cycle because of the time constraint we have. And I think that would actually be it would take some time and be a thoughtful process. So I would vote for doing the 700 as well as actually having the policy discussion next year.
Councilmember Robinson.
I guess I'd make the point that if we're looking for priorities, I would put the green budget above this budget and let this one come down before I let the green budget item come down.
From a level of?
Well, we've set the green at 150.
Right.
And if something has to be cut, I'd cut this from wherever it is. I mean, I'd prefer it be 6, but if it's at 7, I mean, this is a straw non-vote, as I understand it. So I prefer that this number be pushed down rather than the green number.
Okay, so how many for 7? 3 for 7. How many?
Josh's hand went up too.
Sorry. So majority wants to keep it at 7. Okay. The facilities maintenance reserve funding established at 250, which was kind of pulling pulling those pieces out of what had been the equipment replacement reserve. Are we happy with that one at 250? Yes. The Miller paver funding remaining, I'm assuming yes. And the environmental initiatives funding we already set. Have we missed anything, or are we finished?
Because you have a minute to go.
Okay, then we're adjourned before 11 o'clock.